She had $300 million in that briefcase, and she couldn't save her own daughter. The gun was real. The man holding it was shaking, and the little girl with pigtails was crying so hard she couldn't breathe. Nobody in that marble lobby saw what Evelyn Harrow missed: the quiet man in the faded work jacket standing near the back wall, watching every exit, counting every weapon, already 3 moves ahead. She'd dismissed him 40 minutes earlier like he was invisible. She was about to find out exactly who he was. If you're new here, subscribe right now and follow this story all the way to the end. I promise you, you do not want to miss what happens next. Hit that like button and drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Sky over downtown Nashville had that particular gray quality it gets in early fall, not quite threatening rain, but not promising anything comfortable either. Kind of sky that makes people walk faster without quite knowing why. Evelyn Harrow noticed the sky for approximately 2 seconds before her phone buzzed again, and then she noticed nothing except the screen in her hand and the document her attorney was reading aloud from the back seat of the town car. The amended clause in Section 14 still has the language from the February draft, Daniel Marsh said. He was 61, had been her lead attorney for 9 years, and had the particular quality of sounding perpetually disappointed without ever raising his voice. If we signed it as written, Kellerman's team has a 6-month window to challenge the asset transfer. We change the language before we sign, Evelyn said. They may push back. They can push back all they want after the ink is dry. She scrolled through her email without looking up. That's why I pay you, Daniel. Fix it in the room. From the seat beside her, a small voice said, "Are we almost there?" Evelyn looked over at her daughter. Lily was 7 years old, with her father's dark eyes and Evelyn's stubborn jaw, and she was wearing a yellow raincoat over her school clothes because she'd insisted on it despite the fact that it was not raining, and the forecast showed no rain for the next 3 days. She had her seatbelt fastened and both hands folded neatly in her lap, the way she always sat in cars, a habit nobody had taught her, just something she did. And every time Evelyn noticed it, her chest did something complicated that she didn't have time to examine. 5 more minutes, Evelyn said. You said that last time. Last time I meant it too. Traffic. Lily looked out the window. You promised pancakes. After the meeting. I promised pancakes after the meeting. How long is the meeting? Not long. Evelyn went back to her phone. It's just signing papers. Lily accepted this with the quiet skepticism of a child who had heard that particular sentence many times and understood it to be unreliable. She went back to the small book she'd been reading, something about horses, which was her current obsession, and said nothing else. The town car pulled up to Riverton Trust Bank at 9:47 in the morning. The bank's lobby was everything that old money thought a lobby should be. Marble floors the color of cream and smoke, dark wood paneling that had probably been expensive when it was installed, and was certainly expensive now. Brass fixtures that someone polished regularly. The ceilings were high enough that conversations bounced off them in ways that made even ordinary sentences sound slightly formal. Evelyn had been in rooms like this her entire adult life. She walked through them the way most people walk through their own kitchens. Behind her came Daniel, her personal assistant Jocelyn, 2 junior attorneys carrying document cases, and the 2 executives from Harrow Capital who were required to witness the signatures. It was a small procession, but it moved with the efficient certainty of people who knew exactly where they were going and expected other people to step aside. A bank manager named Howard Pryor met them at the lobby entrance with handshakes and a nervous smile. He was the kind of man who had spent his entire career being pleasant to people with money, and he had refined it to an art form that was almost completely invisible. Ms. Harrow, wonderful to have you. We have the private signing room prepared. Can I get anyone coffee, water? Coffee, 3 people said simultaneously. Course. Right this way. Lily walked beside her mother, close enough that their arms occasionally touched, looking up at the high ceiling with the uncomplicated curiosity of a 7-year-old who had been told to stay close and was staying close while still examining everything. Why is it so quiet in here? She whispered. Banks are quiet, Evelyn said. Why? Because people are concentrating on money. Lily considered this. That seems exhausting, she said, and Evelyn almost smiled. They were settling into the private signing room, a glass-walled space off the main lobby, furnished with a long table and chairs that cost more than most people's sofas when the first piece of trouble arrived. It arrived in the form of a paper coffee cup, a faded gray jacket, and a man who was clearly not supposed to be in their orbit. He was standing near the lobby's commercial service counter, which was around the corner from the private signing room. 30 intervened. 38 years old, though he could have passed for older or younger, depending on the light. He was not small, but he didn't take up space the way men who knew they were significant tended to. He wore work boots that had been resoled at least once. His jacket had a small company logo on the chest that was too faded to read clearly. He was holding a manila envelope and waiting for someone at the service counter, and he was doing what most people do in banks, standing still and existing quietly. The man at the counter turned unexpectedly, bumped the service counter's edge, and knocked a coffee cup that had been sitting too close to the edge. Cup hit the polished marble, and a wave of dark coffee spread in a fast, uneven arc directly toward the edge of the table, where Daniel had just set down an open briefcase containing 2 copies of the acquisition documents. Daniel lunged for the documents. The coffee reached the table's edge and began dripping toward the briefcase. Evelyn got there first. She grabbed the briefcase and lifted it, but not before the corner of one document stack caught the edge of the spill. A dark stain spread through the bottom inch of about 30 pages. The lobby went briefly quiet. Spaces go quiet when something has gone wrong. The man in the gray jacket was already crouching, picking up the fallen cup, gathering the small cardboard sleeve that had spun across the floor. He straightened up and looked at the damage with an expression that was calm and plain, in a way that seemed almost wrong for the situation, not panicked, not apologetic. Exactly, just present. "Sorry about that," he said. He reached for a stack of paper napkins from the service counter. "Fine," Evelyn said in the tone she used when things were not fine. She was examining the documents. The stain had reached the bottom corner of maybe a dozen pages. Unprofessional, fixable, not catastrophic. Howard Pryor appeared at her elbow, looking like a man watching his career dissolve into coffee. "Ms., I am so sorry. I'll have those reprinted immediately. We have the files on our secure server. We'll only take." "Fine, Howard," she said again. "The signatures are what matter. The pages are legible." She looked up at the man in the gray jacket, who was quietly blotting the spill on the table's edge with the napkins, trying to prevent it from dripping onto the floor. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at things that were in her way, not with cruelty exactly, but with the particular absent quality of someone who has genuinely not registered another person as being fully in the room. "This is a private area," she said. "The public counters are on the other side of the lobby." The man stopped blotting. He looked at her briefly, just a look, no argument in it, and said, "Yes, ma'am." He set the napkins on the counter, yapped up his manila envelope from where he'd set it, and walked back toward the main service counters without another word. Jocelyn watched him go, and then looked at Evelyn with an expression that said several things without saying any of them. Evelyn was already examining the documents again. "Daniel, are we ready?" "We're ready." "Then let's begin." His name intervened. His name was Graham Vance. He had driven 40 minutes from his apartment in East Nashville to deliver a commercial parts order on behalf of the refrigeration repair company where he worked. The manila envelope contained a signed service contract and 2 certified checks that his employer needed delivered in person, because the bank's commercial client insisted on paper records for anything, over $10,000. It was a task that probably could have been handled electronically in about 90 seconds, but it was a Tuesday, and he wasn't on a service call until 1 o'clock, so he'd driven over. He was used to waiting in places where people didn't particularly notice him. He took a number from the service counter dispenser, 47, and found an open section of the marble bench, near the lobby's main windows to wait, while the counter worked through the people ahead of him. From where he sat, he had a clear diagonal view into the glass-walled signing room, where the woman in the expensive suit was examining documents with her team. He had a comfortable view of the lobby's main entrance. He had a passable view of the bank's service corridor door, because a maintenance worker had been coming and going with cleaning supplies for the past 20 minutes. Graham Vance noticed these things the way most people notice breathing. Deliberately. Just the way he'd been wired for the past decade and a half. Then the past 8 years of not being wired that way professionally, but still being unable to stop. He didn't think about it. He just sat, watched the number display count toward 47, and listened to the sounds of the lobby, settling into its ordinary morning. Then he noticed the little girl. She was maybe 6 or 7, dark hair, yellow raincoat. She'd come out of the signing room while the adults were arranging papers, probably because the room was full of adults arranging papers, and she was 7, and there were only so many ways to be interested in that. She stood just outside the signing room's glass door and looked at the lobby with the open-faced inspection that children deploy when they are not bored, precisely, but are not being entertained either. She looked over at the bench near the windows. Graham looked back. She lifted her hand and gave him a small, careful wave, the kind that wasn't quite committed, in case the adult didn't wave back. He gave her a small nod. She seemed satisfied with this and went back to examining the ceiling. A moment later, a woman leaned out of the signing room and said, "Lily, come back in here, please." The girl Lily went back. Door closed. Graham looked back at the number display. 43. He settled in to wait. Buddy in the lobby heard the door. That was the first thing that was wrong. The main entrance to Riverton Trust Bank had a set of heavy glass doors with pneumatic closers that made a specific sound when they opened, a soft mechanical exhale, followed by the quiet thud of them settling back into the frame. Graham had heard it 11 times in the past 20 minutes. 11 different customers, 11 individual sounds. He heard nothing. His eyes moved to the entrance before he consciously decided to look. 3 men came through the doors. They were moving wrong. Fast would have been obvious. They were moving with the particular deliberateness of people who have rehearsed something and are now executing it, which reads differently than the ordinary movement of people arriving at a bank on a Tuesday morning. They were positioned, wrong, too spread too wide, covering too much of the entrance simultaneously. The masks went on when they were 6 feet inside the door. Graham was already on his feet. He was not sure he had decided to stand up. His body had decided. Down! Everybody down on the floor, now! The voice was the lead robber's. Was the tallest of the 3, holding a shotgun that he leveled at the lobby ceiling while he shouted, and his hands were not entirely steady, which told Graham several things very quickly, them comforting. The lobby detonated into screaming. 6 customers hit the marble floor in various stages of panic and confusion. 2 tellers dove behind their counter. A man near the ATM dropped his wallet and did not pick it up. Howard Pryor, the bank manager, went completely still near the side corridor, and then, with a visible effort of will, raised his hands and knelt down. Graham went to his knees on the marble. He kept his hands visible and his eyes moving. The second robber was shorter, carrying a semi-automatic pistol, moving toward the teller line. What he was doing, he was going for the cage, the registers, the obvious money. Practiced. They'd done this or something like it before. The third robber swept toward the interior of the lobby, covering the customers. He had a pistol and eyes that were moving too fast. Unpredictable. Those were the dangerous ones, not the professionals, but the scared ones. Graham filed all of this away in about 4 seconds. He also counted exits. Main entrance, blocked by the lead robber's position. Service corridor door, still propped open. Maintenance worker almost certainly already fled or hiding inside. Emergency exit on the far wall, alarmed opening it would create noise. Side corridor behind Howard Pryor, connected to the private signing room, and, Graham was fairly certain, to the commercial vault area. Counted people on the floor, 11 customers. 6 employees visible. 1 security guard, older, near the far wall. already face down with his hands on his head. Then he registered the glass-walled signing room. The woman Evelyn had reacted immediately and professionally. She was on the floor. Her team was on the floor. She had pulled the little girl against her chest and was holding Lily with both arms, her body positioned between the child and the lobby entrance. The girl's face was pressed against her mother's shoulder. Lily wasn't screaming. She was making a high, thin sound that was almost worse. Yes, he'd intervened. Graham looked away before his expression could change into something that would attract attention. He needed to think. The lead robber was shouting at the bank manager. "The commercial vault. Where is the commercial vault?" Howard Pryor, to his credit, did not immediately answer. Was either genuinely uncertain what the safest response was, or he was trying to buy time. Either way, it bought Graham approximately 30 seconds to look at the lobby around him. He began to make small decisions. His phone. He'd need to lose it before they collected phones, but not before he did one thing with it. He held it low, below the bench seat he'd slid beside, and typed a message to 911, not a call, which would make noise, but a text. Armed robbery. Riverton Trust Bank, downtown Nashville. 3 armed suspects. Hostages. Service entrance on east side. His thumb hovered for 1 second, then he hit send and slid the phone across the marble into the space under the bench, visible enough that it would be found but far enough away that it wasn't obviously connected to him. The lead robber moved toward the bank manager. "I said, where is the vault?" Howard Pryor said, "I'll need to get authorizations." The lead robber grabbed him by the collar. The lobby went very still. Then, from the signing room, Lily made a sound that was louder than the thin noise she'd been making, a sharp, frightened cry that cut through the marble echo of the bank like something physical. Yet the third robber, the nervous one, turned toward the sound. He walked toward the glass-walled signing room. Evelyn pulled Lily tighter. Graham could see her speaking, not shouting, speaking, her lips moving close to the girl's ear. The robber opened the signing room door. Out. Everybody out. Evelyn came out with Lily pressed against her side. Behind her came Daniel, then the others, hands raised. They knelt on the lobby floor with the other hostages. Lily's face was wet. She was holding the front of her mother's jacket with both fists. Third robber looked at the little girl. Graham watched his face. He watched the robber register, the child really register her, and he watched something shift in the man's expression that was not exactly cruelty, but was something that functioned like it. Leverage. That was the word for what the man was calculating. The lead robber saw it too. He released Howard Pryor and walked toward Evelyn. "You!" He looked at the briefcase that someone had kicked against the wall during the scramble to the floor. "I'm guessing that's yours, which means you're the one with the authorization to open whatever he was about to stall me with." He looked at Lily. "She's yours." Evelyn said nothing. Her arms tightened around her daughter. The lead robber said, "Now, or the kid goes with me instead of you." Evelyn said, "I'll do whatever you want. Let her go first." "That's not how this works. She's 7 years old. She has nothing to do with." He was louder now, and the hands on the shotgun were less steady than they'd been 90 seconds ago. Was the adrenaline coming down wrong? Unpredictable. Dangerous in a different way than the nervous robber, but just as real. He grabbed Lily's arm and pulled. Lily screamed. Evelyn lunged forward and grabbed her daughter back, and the robber raised the shotgun, and the security guard halfway across the lobby flinched toward his hip instinctively. He was 40 years away from any real training, and his weapon was already. It was pure reflex, and for 1 second, the entire marble room hung on a single wrong breath. "Wait," Graham said. It was not loud. It was not particularly dramatic. It was the voice of a man who had learned a very long time ago that authority did not come from volume. The lead robber turned. "There's something you're missing," Graham said. Was still on his knees, hands visible, speaking with the measured calm of a man explaining where the bathrooms were. "The vault you want isn't behind the manager. It's behind the service corridor. Commercial holding room. There's a courier delivery that came in this morning. I was there when they logged it. Currency transfer for a corporate client. more than anything in the public vault by a significant margin. The lobby was completely quiet. The lead robber stared at him. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm nobody," Graham said. "I'm a delivery driver, waiting on number 47. But I've been sitting in this lobby for 20 minutes, and I know what I saw come through that service entrance." The robber was listening. Greed was doing what greed always did. "The service corridor," Graham continued, "is back there, behind the manager. Connects to a secondary secured area. Not the public vault, the commercial holding room. Different Kenko system. Probably why he was stalling you." Howard Pryor's face across the lobby had gone a specific shade of pale. The lead robber looked at him. Howard Pryor said nothing, which was, Graham reflected, exactly the right response for a man who had no idea what was being described, because Graham had invented it entirely. "You're coming with us," the lead robber said to Graham. "Show us." "Fine." Graham began to get up slowly. "But the kid slows you down." "She's scared. She's going to make noise." "Leave her." The robber hesitated for exactly 1 second. The logic was real, even if the destination was fiction. He shoved Lily away. Lily stumbled. She was 7. She'd been grabbed and pulled and released in the span of 30 seconds, and her legs were not entirely trustworthy at the moment. Graham caught her before she hit the floor. He held her for 1 second. She grabbed his jacket with the same fists she'd used to grab her mother's, her whole body shaking, and he felt the weight of her lighter than he expected, lighter than anything that small should have to carry, and he said, very quietly, directly into the chaos of hair near her ear, "I got you. You're okay. Go to your mom." He turned and set her gently toward Evelyn. Evelyn caught her daughter. Over Lily's head, Evelyn looked at Graham. He was already turning away to follow the robbers toward the service corridor, and he didn't see the full shape of what crossed her face. He saw the beginning of it. He was pretty sure she understood. The service corridor door swung closed behind him. The lobby was quieter now, with only 1 robber and 11 people, breathing too fast on a cold marble floor. Evelyn held Lily against her chest and did not look at anything else for a long moment. Daniel leaned very slightly toward her and said, in a voice meant only for her, "That man just traded himself for Lily." Evelyn already knew. She pressed her lips against the top of her daughter's head and said nothing, because there was nothing yet that could be said. The numbers on the service counter display had stopped at 47. The lobby hummed with the silence of people who were still terrified and waiting. Outside somewhere, a siren had started, then another. Then what sounded like several more, growing closer. Evelyn listened to them and held her daughter and thought, for the first time in her adult life, about a man in a faded gray jacket and scuffed boots, understood with a particular and uncomfortable clarity that she had missed something very important when she looked at him. She hadn't seen him at all. The service corridor smelled like cleaning solution and old concrete, the kind of smell that exists behind every polished public space in America, the unglamorous infrastructure that makes marble lobbies possible. Fluorescent lights ran the length of the ceiling in a series of rectangular panels, 2 of which flickered at irregular intervals, throwing the hallway into a subtle, repeating hesitation between brightness and shadow. Graham walked in front. The lead robber was directly behind him, close enough that Graham could hear the man's breathing slightly elevated, panicked, running hotter than it had been in the lobby. His name, Graham had pieced together from the way the other 2 spoke to him, was probably Ray. The second robber, shorter, steadier, the one who'd gone for the teller line, first fell in behind Ray. His name was either Cal or Kyle. Graham hadn't been able to determine which. It didn't particularly matter. What mattered was the corridor itself. Yes, he'd intervened. Graham had been building a working map of it since the moment he'd spotted the prop service from his bench near the lobby windows. He'd done it without meaning to, the way he did most things like this passively, continuously, yes, without ever quite deciding to. 23 years of training and 8 years of trying to forget. The training had produced a man who could not walk into a room without clocking the exits and could not sit in a lobby for 20 minutes without understanding it. geometry well enough to move through it in the dark. Corridor ran east from the lobby, then angled north toward what Graham estimated was the building's rear loading area. Along the left wall, a janitor's closet, unlocked, locked, supply cart visible inside. A mechanical room, a secondary corridor branching toward what was probably the employee break room and restrooms. Along the right wall, a bulletin board with shift schedules pinned to it. A fire extinguisher in a red wall bracket. A series of metal shelving units holding bank supply boxes, paper stock, form folders, rubber-banded rolls of receipt tape. And near the first corner, a large stainless steel rolling cart, the kind used to move heavy file boxes, currently parked against the wall, with one wheel turned outward into the corridor's path. Graham registered the cart and kept walking. How much farther, Ray said. Question, exactly. Around this corner, Graham said. There's a keypad door. I don't have the code, but the manager does. You'd need him or one of the senior officers. You said courier delivery. Describe what you saw. Two men came in through the service entrance around 9:15, carrying cases, the kind that are handcuffed to the wrist. One of them spoke to someone at the commercial counter. They went through a door back here. All of it was invented. It was invented with just enough specific detail to be believable to a man whose brain was running on adrenaline and greed, which meant it didn't need to be elaborate, just credible. Credibility was not about volume of detail. It was about the right detail at the right moment. And you just noticed all this while waiting for a number at the counter, Ray said. I've been waiting 40 minutes, Graham said. There wasn't much else to look at. Ray was quiet for a moment. Behind them, Kyle's footsteps were steady and even. Trained enough to be deliberate. Not trained enough to notice that the man walking in front of them had been taking slightly longer strides since they entered the corridor, subtly extending the distance between himself and the rolling cart they were approaching. Graham turned the corner. The corridor widened slightly here, where it met the branch toward the employee area. The rolling cart was now about 15 feet behind them. The mechanical room door was 8 feet to the left. Corridor continued forward toward a set of double doors that were, in fact, an emergency exit, alarmed, end opening outward, equipped with a crash bar that would require approximately 4 pounds of pressure to activate. Stopped. What? Ray said. Wrong door, Graham said, looking at the double doors with convincing mild confusion. I thought it was the next branch. It's the one back there. He pointed back in the direction they'd come, down the side corridor, directly past the mechanical room, directly past the rolling cart. Ray made a sound that was almost a laugh, but wasn't quite. You said you saw where they went. I saw the general direction. I'm a delivery driver, not a bank employee. I'm telling you what I observed from the lobby service entrance, not giving you a blueprint. It was a beat of silence. Graham had, in the past 11 seconds, identified 3 things that were now true. The mechanical room door was on a standard lever handle with no visible lock. The overhead fluorescent panel nearest to them was in the flickering half of its cycle. The rolling cart single turned-out wheel was positioned in a way that would make it move unpredictably if contacted from the left side. Ray said, "Start walking. Back the way you came." Graham turned around and walked. He walked at a pace that was slightly slower than it needed to be, not obviously so, but enough to compress the distance between himself and Ray, which increased the distance between Ray and the cart. He reached the branch corridor. He turned left, as if following the supposed direction of the fictional courier room. He passed the mechanical room door. His left hand brushed the lever. The mechanical room door swung open 4 inches. Ray didn't notice because the flickering fluorescent panel chose that moment to complete a longer than usual dark cycle, dropping the corridor into 3 full seconds of partial shadow. And in partial shadow, a door swinging 4 inches is not visible if you're not looking for it. Graham kept walking. He reached the rolling cart. He let his left boot catch the cart's turned-out wheel as he passed. Cart moved. It didn't crash, it rolled, with the particular lazy momentum of a heavy object given a small push on a smooth floor, and it came to rest at an angle across approximately 40% of the corridor's width. A barricade, just an obstacle, the kind of thing that takes a second to register and another second to decide how to handle, and that 2 seconds was all Graham was trying to build. He turned at the end of the corridor, pressed his back against the wall, and waited. He counted to 3. Then he stepped back around the corner, reached through the 4-inch gap of the mechanical room door, found the interior light switch by feel in the dark, and flipped it. The mechanical room lights came on. Light flooded through the gap into the corridor at an angle that hit Ray directly in the face as he came around the corner, navigating past the cart. Ray flinched. His hands came up instinctively, and in that involuntary half-second of compromised vision, Graham moved. He didn't hit Ray. He moved past him, to the wider section of corridor, putting distance, and the cart between himself and both men, and simultaneously hit the crash bar on the emergency exit doors with both palms. The alarm went off. It was not a subtle sound. It was the full-throated howl of a commercial building emergency system, filling the concrete corridor with noise that bounced off every surface and made thinking briefly difficult. Ray stumbled back from the sound. Cal or Kyle, who had been navigating the cart from the other side, dropped to a crouch by instinct. Graham was through the doors in 2 strides. He was in a narrow exterior service alley that ran along the building's east side. Cold morning air, concrete, a loading dock to his left, and a 6-foot chain-link fence to his right that opened onto a side street. Beyond the fence, he could already see the black and white of a Nashville police cruiser parked at an angle, and beyond it, 2 more. They'd received the text. They were already here. Graham pressed himself against the building's exterior wall and raised both hands before anyone could make a decision about the man who had just come through an alarmed emergency exit during an active bank robbery. "I'm not armed," he said loudly and clearly. "Delivery driver. I was inside. I've got 2 of them in the service corridor. 1 more is still in the main lobby with the hostages. Pistol, not shotgun." A uniformed officer was already at the fence. Behind her, Graham could see the controlled chaos of a perimeter being established, more units arriving, black tactical van, 2 officers in body armor moving toward the building's rear. "Sir, I need you to come through the gate slowly." "I need to go back in," Graham said. The officer blinked. "Sir, the 2 in the corridor are off balance right now, but that won't last. The one in the lobby is the variable. He's nervous. He's been alone in there for 5 minutes. And there's a 7-year-old in that room." Graham spoke quickly, but without urgency. He'd learned the difference a long time ago. That urgency was what you felt, and quickness was how you communicated when urgency would cost you cooperation. "I have a read on the lobby layout. I know where the obstacles are. I can help contain this faster than a cold entry." The officer studied him for 2 full seconds. Then she said, "You need to step through this gate right now, and you need to talk to my sergeant." Graham stepped through the gate. The sergeant's name was Delgado. He was standing behind a cruiser with a radio and the particular expression of a man who had been managing an evolving situation for 9 minutes and was not interested in additional complications. "Yep. You were inside?" Delgado said. "Delivery errand. I was in the lobby when they came in, and you triggered the exit alarm." "I triggered the exit alarm, yes." Delgado looked at him. "And the 2 suspects in the corridor?" "Disoriented. I bought you maybe 2 minutes of confusion before they regroup and decide to come back to the lobby or push the exit themselves. The alarm doors will slow them. They'll assume it brings police to that entrance, which it does, so they'll go back toward the lobby. That's when your team hits the corridor from the service entrance on the east face." "About the service entrance. I was watching the building for 40 minutes. Delgado looked at him for another moment. There was a quality to the way Graham spoke, not aggressive, self-important, just specific and organized, that was doing something to the sergeant's assessment. Delgado had been in law enforcement for 19 years, and he had a reasonable instinct for the difference between a civilian who thought they knew something and a civilian who actually did. Delgado said, "Graham Vance, what did you do before refrigeration repair, mister?" Graham held his eyes. "Navy. a while back. Delgado absorbed this. He clicked his radio. Alpha Team Service Entrance East Face. Hold on my mark. He looked back at Graham. You stay behind the perimeter. Yes, Sir, Graham said. He watched Delgado turn toward the building and did not move from behind the cruiser. He had done what he could do from the outside. The rest of it, the corridor, the lobby, the tactical entry was other people's job now, and he knew the difference between being useful and being in the way. His eyes stayed on the bank's front doors. He was thinking about the third robber, the nervous one, the one who'd been left alone in the lobby for going on 8 minutes now, 11 hostages, and no visible plan, and whatever sounds were coming through the walls, the alarm, the distant sirens, the silence where his partner's voices should have been. Nervous and alone was a specific kind of dangerous. Had the kind of dangerous that made people do things they hadn't intended to do when they walked through the front door that morning. Graham's hands, folded on top of the cruiser's roof, were very still. Inside the bank, Evelyn Harrow was listening to the alarm. It had started as a distant howl, muffled by the building's interior walls, and then the corridor door had transmitted the sound more clearly, 3 or 4 seconds of full-throated noise before it dropped to the lower, persistent tone of an exterior alarm, which meant a door had been opened and had stayed open. The third robber, she'd started thinking of him as nervous, because she'd run out of other categories, had reacted to the sound by moving to the center of the lobby and pointing a pistol at the ceiling and saying loudly, "Buddy moves." He'd said it 3 times in about 15 seconds, which told her he was frightened, which told her the situation was shifting. Daniel, on the floor beside her, very slightly pressed his elbow against hers. She pressed back slightly. They developed this communication in 9 years of boardrooms and negotiations, a minimal contact that meant, "I'm here. We're calibrating. Hold your position." Lily had stopped shaking as much. Evelyn had spent the last 7 minutes talking to her daughter in a voice that she kept at a steady low register, not whispering, which would communicate secrecy and fear, but not normal volume either. She'd been talking about breakfast, about the pancakes she'd promised, about a specific diner on 2nd Avenue where Lily had once eaten an entire short stack plus 2 strips of bacon at 7 years old and announced that she was too full to walk, and Evelyn had carried her 3 blocks to the car. She'd told that story twice. Lily had corrected her on the bacon. It was 3 strips, not 2, and the correction had meant Lily was thinking clearly enough to care about accuracy, which was probably the best piece of information Evelyn had received all morning. Lily said now, very quietly, "Right here, is that man okay?" Evelyn knew which man she meant. She kept her eyes on the ceiling and said, "Yes." She didn't know. She absolutely did not know. "I just do." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He caught me. Before I fell. He was already moving before I fell." She paused. "How did he know I was going to fall?" Evelyn had no answer for this that was suitable for a 7-year-old lying on a cold marble bank floor with a frightened man pointing a gun at the ceiling. So she said, "Because he was paying attention," which was the truest version of the answer she had. Nervous was still moving. He'd repositioned himself twice in the past 4 minutes, first toward the teller line, back toward the center of the lobby, a few steps toward the corridor door, back again. He was listening for his partners and not hearing them, which was making his body do the thing bodies do when plans stop unfolding as expected. Small, purposeless movements, physical expression of a mind that has lost its map. Howard Pryor, kneeling near the side wall, cleared his throat softly. Nervous pointed the gun at him. "I said nobody—" "I know," Howard said, with the remarkable composure of a man who had apparently decided that if he was going to have a gun pointed at him, he was going to do it with some dignity. "I'm not doing anything. I'm just clearing my throat. I have allergies." Nervous stared at him. "Seasonal," Howard added, as if this were relevant. Something about the sheer mundane absurdity of the exchange seemed to take half a degree off the temperature in the room. It didn't solve anything. It didn't resolve anything. But it reminded the nervous man with the gun that the people on the floor were people, which was in its small and unreliable way, occasionally a stabilizing piece of information. Evelyn watched Howard Pryor with a new and specific respect. Outside, the sirens had multiplied. She could hear them repositioning, which meant containment. They were setting up a perimeter, not doing an immediate entry. That was, depending on how long it took and how stable the situation inside stayed, either a very good sign or a very complicated one. Nervous, he'd heard them too. He went to the lobby's front windows, staying to the side of the glass, and looked out. Evelyn couldn't see what he saw from the floor, but she could see his shoulders, and what his shoulders did when he looked was tell her almost everything. They dropped, not in relief in the specific way that shoulders drop when a person has been hoping for something and has just seen that the thing they hoped for is not coming. Partners weren't coming through those doors. He turned back to the lobby. Car, he said, to no one in particular, to all of them. Someone in here has a car, keys. Right now. Evelyn said, I have a car. She kept her voice even. Town car, it's parked, keys. My driver has them. He's not in here. Nervous said a word that Evelyn made a mental note to hope Lily hadn't heard, though Lily had very likely heard it because she was 7, not deaf. Phone, he said. I need everyone's phones. He'd already collected phones. He knew that. He was thinking out loud, which was a sign of disorganization that could go in several directions. I need to think. Okay, Evelyn said. He looked at her. What? Take a second and think. Nobody's going anywhere. He stared at her with an expression that was trying to determine whether she was condescending to him and couldn't quite land on an answer. Trying to be smart, she said. I'm telling you that right now you have time. Use it. She genuinely did not know if this was the right thing to say. She was not a hostage negotiator. She was a corporate acquisitions executive, which had certain overlapping skill sets, the ability to identify what someone actually wanted underneath what they were saying they wanted, patience to not fill silence before silence had done its work, but it was not the same thing, and she was aware of that. What she was also aware of was that the man in the corridor had bought them time with nothing but his voice and his nerve and a convincing story, and she was not going to waste time in going to waste that time by letting deteriorate because nobody was trying to hold it together. Nervous looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down on the edge of the lobby bench, the same bench where Graham had been sitting 40 minutes ago, waiting on number 47, and he held the gun loosely in his right hand, and he did, in fact, appear to be thinking. Howard Pryor met Evelyn's eyes from across the room. She gave him the smallest possible nod. He gave her one back. In the service corridor, Graham heard the tactical team before he saw them, the particular sound of disciplined movement, bodies in body armor moving at speed in a confined space, which is different from ordinary running and different, again, from the sound of panicked movement. And Graham's body knew the difference. The way it knew many things it had no conscious intention of retaining. He had stayed behind the cruiser. He had kept his word to Delgado. But he had also, in the 8 minutes since the sergeant had moved to coordinate the entry, positioned himself where he could see the bank's front entrance, the side corridor exit, and the tactical team's approach vector simultaneously. Old habit. The entry was fast and contained. He heard it partly through the exterior walls and partly through the radio traffic that Delgado was no longer bothering to shield from him 2 suspects in custody in the corridor. Weapons secured, shots fired. Minor resistance from the shorter one, both restrained. Delgado clicked his radio again. Lobby situation? Static. From an interior unit, 1 suspect. Contained. Peers compliant. Negotiator on approach. Hostages? 11 accounted for +6 employees. No injuries. Graham let out a breath he hadn't been aware of holding. The radio said, child among hostages. Appears uninjured. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment and looked at the sky, which was still gray and unremarkable, the same sky that had been there when he'd driven 40 minutes from East Nashville that morning, with a manila envelope and a service contract and a number to take from a dispenser. 47. He hadn't even made it to the counter. Delgado appeared beside him. The lobby suspect surrendered when the team came through. Shots fired. He looked at Graham with an expression that was evaluating several things simultaneously. Your obstacles in the corridor. The maintenance equipment. Cart. I bumped it, Graham said, and the mechanical room door. It wasn't latched properly. Delgado was quiet for a moment. Mr. Vance, Sergeant, I'm going to need a detailed statement. Yes, sir. And I'm going to need you to stay available because the detective who takes this case is going to have questions I can't answer for you. Understood. Delgado looked at him for a moment longer. You were a SEAL. Graham didn't answer. I'm not asking, Delgado said. I was with the 101st. Mosul, 04. He extended his hand. Graham took it. Thank you, Delgado said simply. Then he turned and walked back toward the command vehicle and his radio and the 19 years of law enforcement procedure that would now spend the next several hours wrapping around everything that had happened inside that marble lobby. Graham stood in the cold morning air and waited. 15 minutes passed. The bank's front doors opened, and hostages began to come out in the careful, blinking way that people emerge from places where bad things have happened tentatively, as if the outside might also be wrong somehow, with increasing speed as they realize it isn't. Howard Pryor came out with one arm around a teller who was crying quietly. Daniel came out with his document cases, which struck Graham as exactly right somehow. The security guard came out limping, supported by one of the junior attorneys, and Graham noted that he'd have to ask about that later. Evelyn came through the doors. Lily was on her hip, all 40-something pounds of her, yellow raincoat and dark hair, and her face buried in her mother's neck, and Evelyn was walking in the particular, careful way of a person carrying something they cannot afford to drop. She cleared the entrance, came down the two broad front steps, and stopped on the sidewalk. She stood there for a moment. An EMT approached and Evelyn spoke to her, and the EMT looked at Lily and said something, and Evelyn shook her head once, and the EMT nodded and stepped back but stayed close. Graham was still behind the cruiser outside the perimeter. Lily lifted her head. She was scanning. Her eyes moved across the sidewalk, across the police vehicles, across the gathering crowd at the perimeter tape, and then she found him. She stared at him for a moment, with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of a child who has been looking for something specific and has now located it. Then she said something to her mother. Evelyn turned. Di Marchi. She looked at Graham across the distance of the police vehicles and the sidewalk in the morning and everything that had happened in the past hour. Mutti-tined. And she looked at the way people look things when they are trying to reconcile two different understandings of the same object. She had dismissed him with 5 words in a look that had lasted less than 3 seconds. He had caught her daughter before she hit the floor. Graham lifted one hand in acknowledgement, not a wave exactly, just a gesture that said, I see you. I'm here. It's all right. And then he looked away to give her a moment, because some things needed a moment, and he knew how to wait. Lily had already decided. She was trying to get down. Evelyn held on for a second longer than she needed to, and then she set her daughter down on the sidewalk. And Lily crossed the distance to the police cruiser, the particular speed of a 7-year-old who has made up her mind, which is faster than most people expect. She stopped in front of Graham. She looked up at him. He crouched down, so he wasn't a tall stranger looking down at her, but a person at her level, which was the only appropriate way to speak to someone who'd had a morning like hers. He said, Hi, she said. Then after a beat you left. I had to go somewhere. Where? Somewhere less interesting than the lobby. He looked at her face. Her eyes were red. Her left cheek still had the mark of dried tears, and she was holding the front of her raincoat with both hands the way she'd held the jacket on both people who'd been close enough to grab. You doing okay? She considered this with seriousness. I'm hungry, she said. Yeah? My mom promised pancakes. Then you should definitely get pancakes, he said. Lily nodded like this was the final resolution of a matter that had been pending all morning. No. Then she stepped forward and put both arms around his neck, and he held her for a moment briefly. someone carefully, and she smelled like the yellow raincoat and something that was probably the hotel shampoo Evelyn had given her that morning, and slightly like the cold marble floor of a Nashville bank lobby. He straightened up when she let go. Evelyn was standing 3 feet away. Vance seemed. She had let her daughter come to him and had followed a distance. And the person she was standing in front of was not the man she had seen when she'd told him the public counters were on the other side of the lobby. She knew that now. She had a feeling she had known it for most of the past hour, somewhere underneath the terror and the cold marble and Lily's hands on her jacket. Evelyn Harrow was not a woman who apologized easily. It was not that she didn't know how. It was that she'd spent 20 years in rooms full of people trying to take things from her, and somewhere along the way she had confused readiness with armor and forgotten that they were different. She looked at this man, faded gray jacket, scuffed boots, 11 missed calls on a phone currently sitting under a bank lobby bench, and she opened her mouth. She said "I don't know your name," he said. "Graham Vance." She said, "I'm Evelyn." "I know," he said. There was a moment between them that was not comfortable exactly, but was honest. She was trying to find the words for what she owed him, and he was watching her try, and neither of them was performing anything. "Graham," she said finally. You don't have to," he said. "I do," she said, "but I don't think right now is when." He nodded once. Yes. She looked at her daughter, who had reached up and taken Graham's hand with the ease of a child who had not yet learned to complicate simple things. "She's right about the pancakes," Evelyn said. The corner of his mouth moved. 7-year-olds are. Lily looked up at him, and then at her mother, and then back at him and said, "Are you coming?" Graham looked at Evelyn. She said nothing, but she did not look away. He thought about Maisie waiting for him at home. He thought about the manila envelopes still sitting on the bank's service counter, and the service call at 1 o'clock, and the 40 minutes of driving back through Nashville traffic. He thought about a number dispenser that had never called 47. "Today, sweetheart," he said. "But you enjoy them." Lily accepted this with the solemnity it deserved. Graham stepped back. An officer approached him with a notepad and the look of a man beginning a process that would take several hours, and Graham went with him without looking back at Evelyn Harrow or her daughter, because the thing that had happened that morning was finished and complete and did not need anything more from him. The sky over Nashville was still gray. Somewhere in the distance, the sirens had stopped. The statement took 3 hours and 40 minutes. Graham sat in a folding chair at a table in the mobile command unit, a converted van parked on the side street east of the bank, and answered questions from a detective named Paulson, who had the patient, methodical quality of someone who had learned that the fastest way through a complicated account was to slow down and get it right the first time. Paulson was maybe 50. With reading glasses, he kept taking off and putting back on, and he asked the same question from 3 different angles sometimes, aggressively, but just to make sure the edges of the answer matched up. Graham answered everything. He answered about the coffee spill and the bench near the windows and the number dispenser. He answered about the 3 men coming through the doors and the way they moved wrong before the masks went on. He answered about the text to 911, about the service corridor, and the mechanical room door and the emergency exit alarm. He answered about the fictional courier delivery and the fictional commercial holding room, and Paulson wrote all of it down without visible judgment. When Paulson asked about his background, Graham said Navy, Special Operations, 12 years, honorably discharged 8 years ago, and did not say more than that, and Paulson wrote it down and did not ask more than that. When Paulson asked why he'd gone back into the corridor instead of leaving through the emergency exit once the door was open, Graham said he'd needed to make sure the 2 suspects were disoriented long enough for the responding units to get into position, and that was mostly true, and Paulson wrote it down. Yanas intervened. He did not ask Graham about the 7-year-old, or about the specific moment he'd caught her before she hit the floor, or about the exchange of a child for a delivery driver in a marble lobby. Those things were apparently either not in Paulson's jurisdiction or not something that needed to be written in the official account, and Graham was grateful either way. He drove home at 2:17 in the afternoon. He'd missed the 1 o'clock service call. He'd texted his employer from the officer's borrowed phone an hour earlier and explained broadest possible terms. He'd been detained at the bank, and his employer, a man named Terry Briggs, who ran a 6-person refrigeration repair operation out of a shop near the fairgrounds, had texted back, saw it on the news. "You okay?" Graham texted back, "Yeah." Missed the call, though, and Terry texted back, "Martinez covered it, go home," which was the closest Terry came to expressing concern and was, Graham understood, genuine. Traffic on 65 was ordinary. He'd been in enough extraordinary situations to have a real appreciation for ordinary, and he drove the 40 minutes home in a specific kind of quiet that was not peaceful, exactly, but was settling. His brain was doing the thing it always did, after processing, cataloging, reviewing each decision point, with the clinical interest of a system running a diagnostic. This was normal. He'd learned not to fight it. He pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex at 2:54. Maisie's car was there. That was wrong. She had a Tuesday afternoon shift at the restaurant, where she worked to help with tuition costs, and her shift didn't end until 5. He took the stairs to the second floor. The apartment door was unlocked, which it was when Maisie was home and expecting him. He pushed it open. His daughter was sitting on the couch with her laptop open and her phone in her hand, and when she looked up at him, her expression did 3 things in rapid succession: relief, then anger, met the particular complicated hybrid of both that Graham associated with having scared someone who loved him. She was 19 years old. She had her mother's eyes and Graham's tendency toward stillness when she was upset, which made her harder to read than most people, which she'd inherited at exactly the wrong time in her life and managed with more grace than he'd had at her age. "You missed your call," she said. "Terry covered it." "Terry texted me." She set her phone down. "I saw it on the news." Graham hung his jacket on the hook beside the door. "How much of it?" "Enough." She paused. They said a delivery driver helped. They didn't name anyone. Her eyes tracked him across the room with the same diagnostic quality his own brain had been running in the car. "You look like you've been sitting a folding sitting chair for 3 hours. Longer than that. Are you hurt?" "No, Dad." "Maisie." "I'm fine." She looked at him for another moment. Then she got up from the couch and came across the room and put her arms around him, which she did not do often. Because she wasn't affectionate, but because she wasn't affectionate, it was 19 and 19 had its own rules about when physical comfort was appropriate, and those rules were hers to set. He put one arm around her, and she pressed her face briefly against his shoulder, the way she'd done since she was small, and neither of them said anything for a moment. She pulled back and looked at him and said, "Was there a kid?" She read his face. "Is she okay?" "She's okay," he said. "She's fine." Maisie nodded. She went back to the couch and sat down, and she did not ask for more than that, because she understood him well enough to know that more than that would come out in pieces, over days and weeks, the way everything always did, and pushing produced nothing useful. He sat down in the chair across from her. "Why aren't you at the restaurant?" "Called in." She looked at her laptop screen. "I had a feeling." He looked at her. She shrugged one shoulder. "It was on the news, Dad. They said the bank was on lockdown for 2.5 hours. You left at 9. You text me when you're done with deliveries. I hadn't heard from you." "I left my phone in the bank." "I know. Because you texted 911 from it, and then left it under a bench." He stared at her. "That wasn't in the news." "No," she agreed. "The detective texted me from your phone to let me know you were safe and that you'd left the phone at the scene and would retrieve it later." She held up her phone and showed him the thread. "Yes, Detective Paulson seems nice." Graham put his hand over his face briefly. "He also said you gave a full statement and were cooperative." Maisie said, with the particular quality she deployed when she was making him aware that she found something funny, but was choosing not to demonstrate it fully, which I thought was a nice thing to include. "Paulson's thorough," Graham said. "He sounds it." Maisie set her phone down. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her screen without seeing it. "The little girl," she said. On the news, they said a child was taken from her mother. The lobby. Graham said nothing, and then returned, Maisie said. Unharmed. He looked at the middle distance. Yeah. Okay, she said softly. That was all she said. It was enough. They sat there for a while without talking, the two of them. In the apartment that still had Maisie's nursing textbooks stacked on the kitchen counter and a cork board near the door, where Graham pinned his service schedules, and Maisie pinned her exam dates and the utility bills that needed attention. The afternoon light came through the sliding glass door to the small balcony, at an angle that turned the room the particular gold of late October. It was quiet in the specific that apartments are quiet when two people who live together have stopped talking and don't need to fill the space. Graham thought about Lily's arms around his neck on the sidewalk. He thought about the weight of her. He thought about Maisie at 7, which was a thing he did, sometimes an involuntary return to that year, the year before his first long deployment, and the year she'd gotten very quiet about him leaving, asking him not to go, just getting quiet. He hadn't understood it fully at 7 the way he understood it now. He understood it the way you understood things you couldn't go back and change. You hungry? Maisie asked. He realized he hadn't eaten since before 9 that morning. Yeah, I'll make something, she said, and she got up and went to the kitchen. Because sometimes the right response to a hard day was a questions about food and then making food. Maisie had figured that out young and had never lost it. He sat in the chair and listened to her open the refrigerator. Outside, no, Nashville went about its afternoon. The news trucks were still outside Riverton Trust Bank at 4 o'clock when Evelyn Harrow's town car pulled away. She had given a brief statement to the police and declined every media request with the particular efficiency of a woman who controlled the terms of her public presence and had not yet decided what the terms were going to be for this one. Lily was asleep on the seat beside her. She'd fallen asleep before they cleared the downtown block, the yellow raincoat bunched under her head as a pillow, her face slack and unguarded in the way children's faces are when they sleep. Stripped of the careful vigilance that had kept her holding on and staying present through 2.5 hours on a cold marble floor. Evelyn watched her. She had been watching her for approximately 37 of the past 40 minutes and had done very little else. Daniel was in the front seat, turned slightly so he could speak to her without raising his voice. He said several things about the acquisition documents, about the postponement they'd need to request, about Kellerman's team and the rescheduling implications. She'd heard all of it and retained none of it, and Daniel, who had been doing this long enough to know the difference between her distracted and her absent, had eventually stopped talking and was now looking out the window. She said, "Yes, the acquisition can wait 2 weeks." "All right, and I want to send something to the security guard. He was injured. I'll find out the details. Not a gift basket," she said. "Whatever he actually needs. Medical expenses, recovery time. Whatever the number is, I'll handle it." She looked back at Lily. "Graham Vance," she said. "I want his full name, address, employer. Through any official channel. Just quietly." Daniel turned slightly. To what end? She thought about it. She thought about a man in a faded jacket who had accepted her dismissal without argument and then spent the next 20 minutes building a chess game with ordinary lobby objects on behalf of people he didn't know. She thought about him inventing a fictional courier room and selling it to a man with a shotgun, with nothing but the calm authority of someone who was used to making decisions that required other people to trust him. She thought about him crouching on the sidewalk so he wasn't tall when he spoke to Lily. "No yet," she said. "I just want to know where to find him." Daniel nodded and wrote something on his legal pad, and that was that. Evelyn looked out the window at Nashville moving past. She had been told, in the hour since the ordeal ended, that she'd done well. The detective had said it. One of the responding officers had said it. Even Daniel, in his restrained way, had said something of keeping the lobby situation stable. She understood that this was probably accurate and felt approximately nothing about it, because the standard she was applying to her own performance that morning had nothing to do with how the professionals assessed her. The standard was simpler and less forgiving than that. She had looked at a man and seen the wrong things, and then she had been in a room with a gun pointed at her daughter, and she had not been able to stop it. He had, with a rolling cart, with a mechanical room door that wasn't latched. With 4 words, "Leave the kid behind," delivered to a desperate man, with exactly the right calibration to make greed override cruelty. She pressed 2 fingers against her mouth and looked at the Nashville skyline and thought that there were different kinds of intelligence in the world. And she'd been operating for most of her adult life, as if she had comprehensive knowledge of what they were. Lily made a small sound in her sleep. Evelyn reached over without looking and put her hand on her daughter's back. Lily's breathing evened out again. They drove the rest of the way home in silence. 3 days passed. Graham retrieved his phone from the detective's office on Wednesday morning. It had 7 missed calls, 2 voicemails from numbers he didn't recognize, and a text from Maisie that said "got my bio's exam back 94," followed by a single exclamation point, which from Maisie was the emotional equivalent of a parade. He texted back, "That's my girl," and went to work. The service call he'd missed on Tuesday was a commercial freezer unit at a restaurant supply warehouse near the Gulch. He covered it Wednesday afternoon, diagnosed a failing compressor, ordered the part, and scheduled the installation for Friday. Ordinary work, useful work, the kind of work where the problem was clearly defined and the solution was specific, and when you were done, the thing was either fixed or it wasn't. He liked that about it. He'd spent 12 years doing a kind of work where what constituted success was sometimes unclear and sometimes unknowable, and sometimes you found out years later that the thing you thought you'd resolved had roots that went deeper than you'd reached. Refrigeration systems did not have that quality. They worked or they didn't, and if they didn't, he could usually find out why. On Thursday, he had 3 calls, 2 routine maintenance checks, and a walk-in cooler repair at a Vietnamese restaurant on Nolensville Road, whose owner fed him lunch while he worked and told him at length about her daughter who was studying engineering at Vanderbilt, which was the kind of conversation Graham could have on a loop because it asked nothing of him and gave him something real in return. He drove home Thursday evening in the dark, thinking about nothing in particular. He did not watch the news. He'd checked once on Wednesday morning to confirm the basic shape of the coverage. 3 suspects in custody, hostages injured, bank robbery foiled with the assistance of a civilian whose identity was being withheld at his own request. That last part had required a specific conversation with Paulson, who'd been cooperative about it, because Graham had no interest in cameras or reporters or the particular exhausting attention that came with being publicly identified as the person who had done the thing. He had a teenager at home and a job he needed to keep, and a service call on Friday. That was the perimeter of what he wanted his life to be right now, and he intended to maintain it. He was in the shop on Friday afternoon, halfway through the compressor installation at the warehouse, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He didn't answer it while he was working. He finished the installation, tested the unit, confirmed the temperature recovery, signed off on the work order, and carried his tools back to the van. He looked at the missed call. There was no voicemail. But there was a text from the same number, sent 4 minutes after the call. My name is Jocelyn Park. I work for Evelyn Harrow. Ms. Harrow would like to speak with you at your convenience. This is not a media request and will not be made public. She asked me to assure you of that directly. You can reach me at this number. Is no pressure and no deadline. Graham read it twice. He sat in the driver's seat of his van in the parking lot of a warehouse site of his on the south side of Nashville, passing Sal, and read it a 3rd time, and then set his phone face down on the passenger seat and sat with the afternoon quiet for a moment. This was coming. Not the specific text from the specific assistant, but the general shape of it, that Evelyn Harrow was not a woman who left things unresolved, and not a woman who had no interest in finding him. She had the resources and the instinct, and he suspected something she felt she needed that the sidewalk outside the bank had not been the right place to say it. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. Not because he was angry at her, he wasn't. Not really. The thing she'd done in the lobby, dismissing him to the public counters, was not remarkable. It was ordinary. He wore a jacket with a faded logo and scuffed boots, and he existed in a bank lobby in the way that people in his position existed in spaces like that, which was with a kind of contextual invisibility that was nobody's particular fault and everybody's collective habit. She'd done what most people in her position would have done. She'd looked at the surface and seen the surface and moved on. It was just that he'd had a long time to understand the gap between surfaces and what was underneath them. And most days he was fine with that gap, and some days he was not. This happened to be a week where the gap had been made unusually visible. He picked up his phone and typed, "I'll be available Saturday morning if that works." He sent it before he could revise it, because revision meant deliberation, and he'd already deliberated enough. Jocelyn Park texted back in 4 minutes. "Saturday morning works perfectly. Would 9 o'clock suit you? Ms. Harrow can come to a location of your choosing." He looked at that last line. She was offering to come to him. That was deliberate. He recognized the gesture. It was someone understanding that the power differential in the situation needed to be addressed in some concrete way, and choosing geography as the address. He typed back, "The repair shop where I work. 1140 Fatherland Street." Sent it, and then he finished loading his tools and drove to his next call. Saturday arrived the way. Saturdays arrived in October in Nashville, cool and slow, with better light than the weekday sky had been managing all week. Graham was at the shop at 8 because he was always at the shop before his appointments. A habit from a professional life where being early was the minimum standard of preparation, and being late was a form of disrespect that compounded under pressure. Terry's shop occupied the front half of a converted garage space on Fatherland. The front section had a service counter and a waiting area, and 3 rolling tool chests. The back section had a workshop space where equipment was repaired and parts were stored. It smelled like metal and lubricant and the particular dry warmth of electric space heaters running against the October chill. No. Graham made coffee in the workshop's small break corner, a drip machine on a folding table, 2 mugs, a bag of ground coffee that Terry restocked with no apparent schedule, so sometimes it was fresh, and sometimes it had been there a while, and this morning it was fine. Nothing special, just hot and real. He poured a cup and stood in the workshop doorway and looked at the street. The town car arrived at 9:02. He registered that she'd come herself, not just sent the assistant. He registered that the car was the same one or one like it from Tuesday morning, and he felt the civic circularity of that. Evelyn Harrow got out of the car without waiting for anyone to open the door for her. She was wearing what looked like plain-clothes dark slacks, a gray coat, nothing that announced anything. She looked at the shop front for a moment, and then she looked at him in the doorway, and she walked toward him with the unhesitating directness of someone who has been rehearsing an approach and has decided to stop rehearsing and just approach. She stopped 2 feet from him. "Graham," she said. "Ms. Harrow," he said. She made a small expression that might have been something other than impatience. "Please." He nodded once. "Coffee?" She looked slightly surprised, as if the offer had rearranged the shape of what she'd been preparing to do. "Yes," she said, "thank you." He poured the second mug and handed it to her, and she wrapped both hands around it and looked around the workshop with a candid curiosity that was, he thought, probably genuine. Most people who came from where she came from performed interest in working spaces. This looked less like performance and more like she was actually looking. "My daughter wants me to tell you something," she said. He waited. "She wants me to tell you that the pancakes were very good." She looked at her mug. "She made me call the diner and ask which ones they were and write down the name so she could tell you specifically. They're the blueberry buttermilk ones. She said you should know in case you ever go." Something shifted in his chest that he wasn't going to name. "That's good intelligence," he said. Evelyn looked up at him. "She also wants to know if you have a dog." "I don't." "She's going to be disappointed." She paused. "She's at home with her grandmother right now. Considered bringing her. But I thought this conversation might be easier without a 7-year-old providing commentary." "Probably wise." She was quiet for a moment. She set the mug on the workbench beside her, and she looked at him directly, the way she'd been failing to do in the signing room on Tuesday morning, when he was a man in a faded jacket near her documents. And she said, "I handled you badly." He didn't respond to that. In the lobby, she said, "Before everything, I spoke to you the way I speak to obstacles. That's what I want to say first, because everything else I'm going to say should come after that and not before it." He looked at her. She was holding eye contact without aggression and without performance, just holding it the way people hold things they've decided to hold, even when it's uncomfortable. "All right," he said. "I've been trying to figure out how to do this," she said. "The appropriate thing. Everyone around me has suggestions. My attorney thinks there should be a financial gesture. My PR person thinks there should be a press statement. My daughter thinks there should be pancakes." She picked up the mug again. "I don't think any of those are right. Not alone." "What do you think?" he said. She looked at him. "I think I want to understand what I missed." "About you specifically." "About I look at people." She was choosing her words carefully, not because she was hiding anything, but because she was trying to be accurate. "I have people working for me who are the smartest people I've ever met at what they do. People who know things I will never know, and I treat them like they're interchangeable with the function they perform. I've known that about myself for a long time, and told myself it was efficiency." She paused. "It's not efficiency." Graham said nothing for a moment. The space heater clicked on in the corner. Outside, a car went past on Fatherland Street. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Not unkindly. Just clearly. She didn't look away. "Nothing," she said. "I want to give you something, and I'm aware that sounds transactional when I say it, which is the problem with being me. Everything sounds transactional. But I mean it in a different way." She looked down at the mug. "You saved my daughter. And before you tell me you were just doing what anyone would have done, I'm going to save us both some time and tell you that I've thought about that a lot this week, and it is not true, and I think you know it's not true." He was quiet. "You built a plan in 20 minutes with furniture and a prop door," she said. "You got a man with a shotgun to release a 7-year-old by appealing to his greed instead of his mercy, which is, I understand enough about negotiation to know that was the correct call and a difficult one." She looked at him. "You did all of that, and then you caught her before she hit the floor, yet then you handed her back to me, and then you walked into a service corridor with 2 armed men." He said nothing. "I want to do something that matters," she said. "Check. Not a press statement. Something that means something." I was hoping she stopped. "I was hoping you might have an idea. Because you understand something about ordinary people in extraordinary situations that I think I've been missing, and whatever program or initiative, or I don't know what to call it yet, whatever it becomes, I want it to come from that understanding, not from mine." Graham looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Tuesday morning, thought about the cart and the door and the number dispenser. Numb, he thought about Sergeant Delgado from the one first, who'd shaken his hand in a service alley. He thought about Howard Pryor saying, "I have allergies," to a man with a gun, and Evelyn Harrow speaking steadily to a nervous robber about time like she was closing a deal, which in a way she was. "There's something I've thought about," he said slowly. "Since I got out. About buildings." She was listening. "Every building I go into for work, there's always one person maintenance, front desk, facilities who knows the actual layout. The official floor plan. The real one. Where the doors stick, where the service exits are, which corridors connect to what. But because they work in it every day." He paused. "But he ever asks them. Not before anything goes wrong. The security protocols are designed by consultants who spend a week there and then leave." Evelyn was very still. "The people who could be most useful in an emergency are never part of the plan," he said. "Because nobody looked at them and thought they had something worth knowing." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long would it take to build a program like that?" He said, "I've never built a program." "I have," she said. "I don't know anything about emergency preparedness." She looked at him. "Would you be willing to think about it together?" He looked at her. She was not performing any of this. She was a woman who had been badly frightened and had come through it and had arrived at a Saturday morning in a refrigeration repair shop in East Nashville, holding a mediocre cup of coffee and asking him a real question. He'd intervened, and he had enough experience with real questions to know the difference. He said, "I'd be willing to think about it." She nodded once, the way people nod when they've been holding their breath and have just been given reason to exhale. She didn't make it dramatic. She just nodded and looked at the workshop around her and said, "This is a good space." "It works," he said. "Does Terry know you're using it for meetings?" "Terry doesn't come in on Saturdays." She almost smiled. "Quite, but almost. Lily's going to ask me if you said anything about the pancakes." "Tell her I'll think about the blueberry buttermilk ones," he said. "She'll interpret that as a commitment." "She might not be wrong," he said. Evelyn Harrow picked up the mug, finished the coffee, and set it back on the workbench. She put her hands in the pockets of her gray coat, and she looked at Graham Vance in his workshop on a Saturday morning in October, and he looked back at her. And neither of them said anything for a moment, because not everything needed to be said on the first try. Outside, Nashville was starting its Saturday, unhurried and ordinary. The light through the shop windows was the kind that made ordinary things look like they might become something else, given enough time and the right conditions, and both of them were still figuring out what those conditions were going to be. The second meeting happened 2 weeks later, not at the shop, but at a conference room on the 14th floor of Harrow Capital's Nashville office, which was the kind of space that had been designed by someone who understood that rooms communicate authority before anyone in them says a word. Graham arrived 7 minutes early, which was habit, and spent 4 of those minutes standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows looking at the city below, while Jocelyn Park offered him coffee, and he accepted it, and she brought it, and left without making conversation, which he appreciated. The room had a long table that seated 12. Evelyn had arranged it so they were sitting at one end, facing each other across the corner rather than across the full width, which was a small choice that changed the geometry of the conversation in ways that were real, even if nobody said so. He noticed it without commenting on it. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her, and a pen she kept clicking once and stopping, once and stopping, not nervously, but with the distracted automaticity of someone whose mind was moving faster than her hands. "I've been doing research," she said, without preamble, which he was learning was how she started things when she had been thinking about them, long enough to be past the part where you needed to ease in. "On what?" he said. "Workplace emergency preparedness. What currently exists, what it costs, what it actually produces." She turned the legal pad toward him. It had handwritten notes in 3 columns, dense and cross-referenced with arrows. The federal standards are minimum standards. Most private organizations meet the minimum and call it done. There are a handful of programs that go further, but they're expensive, they're consultant-driven, and they treat employees as people who need to be told what to do, rather than people who already know something useful. Graham looked at the legal pad. Her handwriting was small and fast, and she'd run out of column space and written sideways up the margin of the 3rd column. "You wrote all this by hand," he said. "I think better on paper." "So do I," he said, and she looked briefly pleased by that, way people look when they discover an unexpected point of commonality and aren't sure whether to acknowledge it. He looked at the notes. She had done genuine work here, not a summary someone else had prepared, the kind of engaged, questioning engagement that produced marginalia and circled items, and a question at the bottom of the 3rd column that read, "Is the real expert in any given building?" underlined twice. "That question," he said, pointing to it, "that's the center of it." "That's what I thought," she said. "The maintenance worker, the facilities manager, the front desk person who's been there 15 years, the loading dock supervisor," she paused, "the delivery driver who sits in the lobby for 40 minutes and understands the entire floor plan." He looked at her. "I'm not trying to be pointed," she said. "I mean it descriptively." "I know," he said. She clicked the pen once. "If we build something, it needs to start with those people, with the C-suite's emergency response plan. with the people who actually know the building. She tapped the legal pad. I want to fund it properly, not as a charity project with my name on it, as an actual operational program with measurable outcomes and real funding, and someone who knows what they're doing running the training side. You're looking at me, he said. I'm looking at you, she agreed. But I'm not going to pretend that's not a significant ask. You have a job. You have a daughter who's finishing her first year of nursing school. I'm not going to walk in here and disrupt your life and call it gratitude. She set the pen down. So I want to know what you actually want, not what you think you're supposed to say. What you want. He looked at the city through the window for a moment. What he wanted was something he hadn't examined clearly in a while. Because wanting things clearly required a kind of sustained attention to your own interior that was difficult to maintain when you were working 6 days and managing a 19-year-old's tuition costs and keeping the apartment functional. He'd gotten very good at the immediate, the next call, the next repair, the next thing Maisie needed. He'd let the longer horizon blur, not because he'd given up on it, but because it had been easier than looking at it directly. I want Maisie to finish school without debt, he said. That's first. Done, Evelyn said without hesitation or ceremony. He looked at her. That's not why I said it. It's not, she said, which is why I could say it that simply. What else? He was quiet for a moment. I want the program to be real. PR thing. Not something that exists on paper and gets one workshop a year and then sits in a filing cabinet. Agreed. I want the people who build it to be the people who actually work in buildings. Consultants. He paused. And I don't want my name on anything public. Profile, no press, nothing with my face. She looked at him steadily. That's going to be difficult to navigate because the program needs credibility, and credibility in this world usually requires a face. Program's credibility comes from whether it works, he said. From whether someone recognizes my face. She considered this. All right, we find another way to establish credibility. She picked up the pen again. What else? I want to keep the shop, he said. She stopped clicking. You want to keep the refrigeration job. Part-time. I'll work around whatever the program needs. But I want to keep the work. He looked at her. How that sounds. It sounds like you know something about yourself, she said, without any condescension in it. Why? He thought about how to say it. Because the work is honest. The compressor either works or it doesn't. There's no politics in a freezer unit. Stopped. I've spent enough of my life in situations where what success looked like was unclear. I need something where it's clear. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I understand that more than you might think. He looked at her. I've been building companies since I was 24, she said. Acquisitions, restructuring, capital reallocation. I'm very good at it. And 3 weeks ago, my daughter was crying on a marble floor, and I couldn't do a single thing with any of it. She said it plainly, without self-pity, as a statement of fact that she had been carrying and was setting down briefly. Yes, I understand wanting something where the outcome is unambiguous. He held her eyes. Keep the shop, she said. We build the program around your schedule. They worked for 2 more hours that morning. Real work, not vision statements or mission language, but specifics. Which buildings to approach first. The training model would look like. How to identify the people who held institutional knowledge without titles. How to measure whether anything they built was actually changing outcomes. Evelyn was fast, and she was rigorous, and she pushed back when something he said was vague in ways that would create problems later. And he pushed back when something she proposed was scaled too large, too quickly, and would lose its specificity trying to become a product. Disagreed substantively. They disagreed twice substantively, and both times they better than either of them had started with. At noon, Jocelyn knocked and opened the door. Miss, you have a 1 o'clock across town. Cancel it, Evelyn said. Jocelyn's expression registered something carefully neutral. Kellerman meeting. Reschedule it. She looked at Graham. Can you stay? He had a service call at 3. He said so. 2 o'clock? She said. He said 2 o'clock worked. Jocelyn withdrew. Evelyn ordered lunch from somewhere. She asked him what he wanted, and he said whatever was easy. And she gave him a look that said that answer was insufficient, so he said, a sandwich. And she said, what kind? And he said, turkey. And she ordered turkey for both of them, and they kept working while they waited for it. The food arrived. They ate and kept talking. Neither of them acknowledged that this was not how either of them had expected a Saturday morning in a refrigeration shop to develop into. Maisie found out about the tuition on a Wednesday evening 3 days later. She came home from her afternoon shift at the restaurant to find a letter on the kitchen table official from the financial aid office at the nursing program, and Graham was sitting in the chair across the room, not quite reading the paper and very much aware of the letter. She stood in the kitchen and read it once. Then she read it again. Then she set it down and looked at him. Dad, yeah. This says my tuition balance has been paid. She looked at the letter again. Full for the remaining 6 semesters. Yeah. By something called the Harrow Vance Educational Initiative, which does not exist in any public record I can find, because I looked it up on my phone in the parking lot before I came upstairs. He said nothing. Graham Allen Vance, she said. Maisie, you let her pay for my school. I negotiated it as part of a legitimate working arrangement, he said. I'm building a program for her. She's compensating in several forms. That's one of them. Maisie stared at him. She had her mother's eyes, and right now they did something, that her mother's eyes used to do when he was wrong about something and she was deciding whether to tell him precisely how wrong. He'd missed that look for 12 years, and he'd also, in an honest moment, occasionally found it difficult, because it was the look of a person who saw through exactly the things he tried to put between himself and being seen. She saved your life, Maisie said. You saved her daughter's life. Those things happened. Letting someone who has resources help you with something that actually matters is not weakness. I know that, he said. Do you? He looked at the letter on the table. It's right. It's just that you've been the one doing things for other people for so long that being on the receiving end feels wrong, she said. Harshly. Just accurately. He didn't answer because the accurate thing sometimes didn't need an answer. Maisie came over and sat on the arm of the couch near his chair and looked at the letter with him. 6 semesters, she said quietly. That's Dad, that's everything. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Is she good, Evelyn? He thought about it. She's complicated, he said. She's learning something about herself, and she's not pretending she's further along than she is. That's more than most people do. Are you going to be working with her for a while? Looks like it. Maisie looked at him sideways. She stopped. Finish the sentence, he said. Is she someone you could be friends with? He was quiet for a moment. Maybe, he said. Haven't figured that out yet. Maisie made a sound that he chose not to interpret too specifically. She got up from the couch, arm, and picked the letter up from the table and held it in both hands the way she held things she was trying to make real. I'm going to write her a thank you letter, Maisie said. You don't have to. Dad, I'm going to write her a thank you letter. She looked at him. You're going to give me her address and stay out of it. Stayed out of it. Evelyn received Maisie's letter on a Thursday morning, read it at her desk before the 9 o'clock calendar, and then read it again. It was handwritten, 2 pages, and it was not the thank you letter of someone performing gratitude. He'd intervened. It was the thank you letter of a 19-year-old who had grown up watching her father hold things together with the specific resources available to him, which were not financial but were considerable in ways that financial resources couldn't quite replicate, and who understood exactly what the combination of those 2 different kinds of resource could become. She wrote back, by hand, on actual notepaper, which Jocelyn seemed to find startling when she asked her to find some. Lily, who had been told about Maisie in the general terms appropriate for a 7-year-old, immediately decided that Maisie was her favorite person she hadn't met yet, and began asking when they were going to see her. Mont was a question. Evelyn filed under eventually, without giving it a specific timeline, because the relationship between herself and Graham was still something she was navigating carefully, and she didn't want Lily to make it more complicated by deciding things ahead of schedule. Lily, unfortunately, had strong opinions about schedules, and their relationship to what she wanted. The Thanksgiving situation was her doing. Started 3 weeks before the holiday, when Lily asked at dinner what they were doing for Thanksgiving, and Evelyn said they were going to her mother's house in Brentwood the way they always did. And Lily said, "Can Graham come?" Evelyn set her fork down. "He probably has his own plans," she said. "Can we ask? It's personal. Asking someone to Thanksgiving is personal." Lily thought about this. Why? Because Thanksgiving is a family thing. But he doesn't have family here, except Maisie, Lily said with the devastating logical precision of a 7-year-old who had clearly been thinking about this. His parents are in Michigan, and his brother is in Seattle. And Maisie has Thanksgiving at the hospital volunteer thing she's doing this year. I asked Jocelyn. Evelyn stared at her daughter. "You asked Jocelyn." "Everything. Jocelyn is my employee, Lily. She didn't research it. I just asked, and she knew." Lily looked at her plate. "He's going to be alone. He's a grown adult. He can." "Mom," Lily looked up. The dark eyes her father had given her were doing the thing they did when she was not going to be redirected. "He held my hand when I was scared. Can we please ask him?" Evelyn looked at her daughter for a long moment. She thought about the service corridor. She thought about a man who had caught a falling child without being asked and handed her back without requiring anything in return. She thought about the shop on Fatherland Street and the mediocre coffee and the yellow legal pad and 2 hours of genuine disagreement that had produced something neither of them had arrived with. She thought about the way Maisie's letter had described her father. "He shows up. That's what he does. For everyone but himself. I'll ask," she said. Lily went back to her dinner with the expression of someone who had secured the outcome they wanted and was being calm about it. Graham said no the first time. He said it without explaining much, just that he didn't want to impose on her family, and Evelyn relayed this to Lily, who received it with a silence that communicated volumes, and Evelyn texted Graham back and said, "My daughter is going to be disappointed, which I'm telling you not as pressure, but as honest information." He texted back, "She'll get over it." Evelyn texted back, "Probably. But for what it's worth, it's not an imposition." And then she didn't text again and let it sit. Texted her 2 days later, "Does your mother know you're inviting a refrigeration repairman to Thanksgiving?" She texted back, "She knows I'm inviting someone who helped us. She's grateful." Graham texted, "That's a diplomatic description." Evelyn texted back, "I'm a diplomatic person." Pause. Their pause. He sent, "What time?" She sent, "Noon." "Bring anything. My mother will already have too much food." He sent back, "I'm bringing something." She sent, "Graham." He sent, "It's rude to come empty-handed." She sent, "Fine." He sent, "What does your mother drink?" She sent, "Chardonnay." He sent, "This is a mistake." He sent, "Probably. See you Thursday." He showed up at 11:58 with a bottle of Chardonnay that was better than she'd expected, and a small bouquet of flowers that was clearly something he'd picked up from a grocery store and had wrapped neatly in the paper it came in, and he handed both to Evelyn's mother, whose name was Patricia, before anyone could introduce them. Tricia Kwan was 68, had spent 30 years as a high school principal, and had a quality about her that was common to people who had spent decades managing other people's worst behavior. She assessed quickly and quietly and then committed to the assessment without making a show of having made it. She looked at Graham when he handed her the Chardonnay and the grocery store flowers, and she said, "Well, come in out of the cold," with the warmth of someone who had already decided. Lily appeared from somewhere in the house at a speed that suggested she had been watching for the car. She stopped in front of Graham. He crouched down the way he had outside the bank. "Level, no performance." "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. Immediately, "Did Mom tell you about the pancakes? The blueberry ones?" "She did." "Are you going to go?" "I'm thinking about it." Lily processed this. "Maisie could come too," she said. "The diner is big enough." "I'll mention it to her," he said. Lily nodded, and then looped her arm through his with the complete ease of a 7-year-old who had already decided how things were going to be, pulled him toward the living room to show him something, a drawing she'd done. It turned out, of the bank lobby, which was architecturally approximate and contained several figures that she narrated in detail. Evelyn watched this from the entryway and felt something complicated move through her that she didn't immediately categorize. Patricia appeared at her elbow. He crouched down, her mother said. What? When Lily came to the door. He crouched down to her level without anyone suggesting it. Patricia looked into the living room where Lily was explaining the drawing with both hands. That's not a small thing. No, Evelyn agreed. How long have you been working together? About 6 weeks. Patricia looked at her. And we're building a program. A real one. It's going to take a year at minimum before it has any operational presence. That's not what I asked, her mother said. Mom, I'm asking how you're doing, Evelyn, not how the program is doing. Evelyn watched Graham in the living room, sitting now on the coffee table, because Lily had commandeered the couch, listening to a 7-year-old explain a crayon drawing of a robbery with the patient attention of a man who had nowhere more important to be. No yet, she said. Patricia nodded once, the way people nod when they accept an honest answer, even if it's incomplete. The Chardonnay is good, she said, and went back to the kitchen. Dinner was not graceful. Turkey had been in slightly too long and the skin was overdone in patches, and Patricia's green bean casserole had gotten cold while everything else was being finished, and Lily spilled cranberry sauce on the tablecloth within the first 4 minutes and then looked at Graham to see if he'd noticed, which he had. He handed her a napkin without saying anything. Was apparently the correct response because she bolted the spill with a focus that suggested she was trying to contain the damage before her grandmother saw. Her grandmother had already seen but said nothing. Graham ate everything on his plate and had seconds of the stuffing and said, when Patricia asked, that the turkey was good genuinely, politely. Yes, because he'd apparently eaten enough bad food in enough austere circumstances that slightly overdone turkey with excellent stuffing registered as a real meal and not a qualified one. Patricia looked at Evelyn when he said it. Evelyn looked at her plate. After dinner, Lily fell asleep on the living room couch under a knit blanket with a television program about horses playing quietly in the background. Patricia excused herself to do the dishes, which she always did alone and had never once accepted help with, which the family had long ago understood as her form of post-dinner decompression. Evelyn and Graham sat at the table with coffee. The house was quiet in the specific way that houses are quiet after a large meal when the people are still there, but not requiring anything from each other. Your mother is remarkable, he said. She likes you, Evelyn said. She doesn't show it the same way other people do. But she liked the Chardonnay, and she liked that you ate the turkey without making a face. So, the turkey was fine. The turkey was slightly overdone. It was fine, he said. Food is fine when it's made by someone who meant it. She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee cup. He'd said it plainly, not as a sentiment but as a statement of something he'd arrived at through experience. And she thought about what 12 years of military service and 8 years of single fatherhood, and however many meals eaten alone or in the field, had produced in a person what kind of specific and unperformable gratitude for ordinary things made with care. I've been in rooms, she said. Catered dinners, client events, charity galas. Food that costs more per plate than some people's monthly rent. She paused. My daughter fell asleep on that couch at 6:45 with cranberry sauce on her shirt, and that's the best Thanksgiving I can remember in about 4 years. He was quiet. I'm not saying that to be poignant, she said. I'm saying it because I'm trying to figure out when the balance shifted, and I think it was before the bank. I think it had been shifting for a while, and I was too busy to notice. Lily noticed, he said. Lily notices everything, she agreed. She's going to be terrifying when she's 40. She's pretty terrifying now, he said. And Evelyn laughed, not the managed. Appropriate laugh, she deployed professionally, but the real one, that was too short and slightly undignified. And Graham looked at her when she laughed, the way people look at things that are slightly unexpected and not unwelcome. They were quiet for a moment. The program, she said. I want to announce it in January. Just a press release. Nothing with your name. We'll call it the Ground Level Initiative, unless you hate that. I don't hate it, he said. It's accurate. I want to pilot it in 3 of my commercial buildings first. 6 months, measure the outcomes, adjust, expand. Who's running the training sessions? I was hoping you could recommend someone. From your background, not mine. He thought about it. There's a guy I served with. He's in Memphis now, doing corporate security consulting, but he's been wanting to pivot toward something with more community application. I could reach out, she said. I'll set up a call. He nodded. Outside, the November evening had gone dark, and the neighborhood was doing the after-dinner quiet of a street full of houses where people had eaten too much and were now stationary. A dog barked once 2 houses down and then stopped. Graham, she said. He looked at her. She had been deciding something for the past 40 minutes, possibly longer, and she made the decision now, the way she made most decisions, by simply making it. Because deliberation had a point of diminishing return, and she generally knew when she'd reached it. I'm glad you were in that lobby, she said. Not because of what you did, although obviously. I'm glad you were there because of how you were there. How you sat in that room for 40 minutes and saw things that I walked past without registering. She paused. I've been thinking about what it cost you to become that person. The seal part. The person who sits quietly and sees everything and asks for nothing. He didn't answer right away. I'm not sure it cost anything, he said finally. Just what happens when you pay attention long enough. Most people don't, she said. Most people are paying attention to the right things, he said. Things that are theirs. Their families, their work, their lives. The way I pay attention is it's useful sometimes. It's also a hard way to live. He looked at his coffee. Maisie says I don't let people do things for me. She's been saying it since she was 15. She's right, Evelyn said. Yeah, he said, I know. Coffee had gone cold. Neither of them moved to do anything about it. From the living room came the soft sound of the television. The narrator of the horse program, describing something in a tone designed for children on the edge of sleep, and underneath it, the quiet, even sound of Lily breathing, which Evelyn had been able to identify across a room since approximately the first day of her daughter's life, and which still, at 7 years old, was one of the most orienting sounds she knew. Thank you for coming, she said. Lily would have made your life very difficult if I hadn't, he said. Lily would have been fine, she said. She's resilient. She is, he agreed. She's going to be exactly like you. Evelyn looked at him. He said it without any particular weight, plainly, as an observation, and she thought about whether that was meant as a complicated thing and concluded that it wasn't. He was not a man who said complicated things plainly. He was a man who said plain things plainly and let them land where they landed. I'm going to pretend that's a compliment, she said. It is one, he said. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she stood up and began clearing the coffee cups, because that was the right next thing to do, and he stood up and helped without being asked, because that, she was learning, was what he did. They washed the cups side by side at Patricia's kitchen sink without talking, and the house was quiet around them, and outside the Nashville night had settled into itself. Yes, he and neither were the same people who had stood in a bank lobby 8 weeks ago on opposite ends of a power differential that had turned out to be less fixed than either of them had assumed. January arrived with the particular coldness that Nashville manages in its own way, not the brutal, systemic cold of northern winters, but a damp, penetrating chill that gets into buildings and stays, and that makes people move faster on sidewalks and stand closer together at crosswalks without quite deciding to. Press release went out on a Tuesday morning, the 14th of January, through Harrow Capital's communications office. It was 4 paragraphs. It described the ground-level initiative as a workplace emergency preparedness program built around the knowledge of facilities staff, maintenance workers, and frontline employees in commercial buildings. It named Evelyn Harrow as the founding supporter. It did not name Graham Vance. It described the philosophy of the program in language that Graham had written himself in the workshop on Fatherland Street on a Tuesday afternoon in December when Terry had been out on a call and the shop was quiet. People who know a building best are usually the people nobody thinks to ask. This program starts by asking them. By Wednesday morning, the release had been picked up by 3 local news outlets and 1 national trade publication focused on commercial real estate and building management. By Thursday, Evelyn's office had received 41 inquiries from building managers, facilities directors, and HR departments across Tennessee and 4 neighboring states. Jocelyn forwarded the inquiry log to Graham's phone with a single line of text, 41. Told you. He was under a restaurant walk-in cooler when he got it, lying on his back with a flashlight in one hand, diagnosing a refrigerant leak in a line that had been crimped by a careless delivery 3 months ago and left untreated until the unit started cycling warm. He read the text, set his phone on the concrete beside him, and went back to the leak. The number didn't surprise him. That was the thing about people who felt invisible. There were a lot of them, and they'd been waiting for someone to build a door sized for them, without quite believing anyone would. Marcus Webb arrived in Nashville on the 3rd Friday of January. He drove up from Memphis in a truck that had seen better days, but ran well, which Graham recognized as the same philosophy they'd both applied to equipment for most of their adult lives. Marcus was 42, black, like a man who had kept the discipline of his service years without making a performance of it. And he had a way of occupying a room that was similar in the sense that he didn't try to fill it, but you were aware he was there. They'd served 2 overlapping deployments together, in a context that neither of them discussed in any detail, and which was in the official record, summarized in language that communicated very little about what had actually occurred. They had trusted each other, in conditions that were designed to test whether trust was possible, which meant their trust now was the kind that didn't need maintenance. Marcus shook Graham's hand in the parking lot of the Fatherland shop, looked at the building, and said, "This is it? Terry lets me use the back section. Did Terry know about the program?" "Terry knows. I'm doing something with a businesswoman." He asked if it was legal, and I said yes, and he said okay. Marcus made a sound that served as a laugh. "I missed you, man." "You didn't," Graham said. "Get inside. It's cold." They worked for 6 hours that first day, the 3 of them, Graham, Marcus, Evelyn, who arrived at 10 with coffee from a place that was better than the drip machine and did not comment on the fact that the table they were working on was a repurposed workbench with a piece of plywood laid across it. Yet Evelyn and Marcus assessed each other in the first 20 minutes, with the efficiency of 2 people who had both spent careers reading rooms and knew they were being read in return. By the time they got to the second hour, they had established a working dynamic that was direct and specific, and occasionally argumentative in the productive way, which meant it was working. Marcus had confused. Marcus had ideas about the training structure that Graham had arrived at, and Evelyn had questions about the training structure that neither of them had fully answered yet. By late afternoon, they had the skeleton of a 6-week pilot curriculum that was specific enough to be real and flexible enough to be honest about what they didn't know yet. "First building," Marcus said. "Who's it going to be?" "I have 3 commercial properties in Nashville," Evelyn said. "I'd suggest starting with the one on Commerce Street. Mixed use. Retail on the ground level, offices is above, parking structure on the east side. 200 employees across the tenants. Facilities manager?" Graham said. "Woman named Denise Okafor. Been in that building for 11 years. Evelyn paused. "I called her last week. Told her what we were building. She said, and I'm quoting directly, about time somebody asked." Marcus looked at Graham. Graham looked at Marcus. "Denise sounds like our first instructor," Marcus said. Evelyn wrote it down. The pilot started on the 5th of February. Denise Okafor was 53 years old, had started in building maintenance when she was 22, knew the Commerce Street property the way surgeons know as anatomy, not just what was where but why, the history of it, the decisions that had been made over 11 years that had produced the building's current configuration of corridors and service paths and loading protocols and the one exit on the second level that nobody used because the handle had been stiff. Yes, he'd intervened for 8 months and nobody had gotten around to fixing it until the 3rd week of the pilot, when Denise pointed it out during a walkthrough and a maintenance worker fixed it in 40 minutes. Det mince it. That stiff handle became the opening story of every subsequent training sentence Marx ran. because it was the perfect illustration of what the program was built around. The things that the people inside a building know that no consultant walking the floor for a week would ever find. Because they're not looking for the things that have become invisible through familiarity. People who know them haven't been given a reason to say them out loud. Graham ran the first walkthrough himself, with Denise beside him. He asked her to show him the building the way she saw it, not the floor plan version. And she did 2 hours of corridors and mechanical rooms and service elevators and the specific acoustics of the parking structure that meant you could hear someone approaching from the east ramp before you saw them, which she'd used exactly once to identify a car running without lights at 3 in the morning. He took notes on paper. He always took notes on paper. At the end of the walkthrough, Denise said, "Nobody ever did this before." "The walkthrough," he said. "The asking," she said. "I've had 3 different building management companies in 11 years. They come in, they do the inspection, they update the fire evacuation maps. Nobody ever said, 'What do you see that we're missing?'" Graham thought about a number dispenser, about a bench near windows, about 40 minutes in a lobby that had looked ordinary until it wasn't. "You see it because you're there every day," he said. "That's not a small thing." It felt like a small thing, she said. Until right now. By the end of the 6-week pilot, they had documented 47 specific building vulnerabilities across the Commerce Street property that had not appeared on any official safety assessment. 43 of them were corrected within 30 days. The remaining 4 required structural decisions that were above Denise's authority. Evelyn made those decisions, all 4, within a week of receiving the report. The second building started in March, the third in April. By May, they had a waiting list. Graham was still at the shop 3 days a week. Terry had adjusted his schedule without being asked, in a way that suggested he understood more about what was happening than he'd let on, which was consistent with Terry's general operating philosophy of knowing things without making you aware he knew them. Maisie finished her second semester with a 3.8 GPA and started a summer clinical rotation at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, which was, as Graham understood it, easy to get into as a second-year student, and which she'd gotten on the strength of her own application and a recommendation from a professor who had nothing to do with Evelyn Harrow. He took her to dinner the night before the rotation started. A Vietnamese place on Nolensville Road, not the one where the owner had fed him lunch during the cooler repair, but a different one Maisie had found. She ordered for both of them in confident, approximate Vietnamese that made the server smile, and talked about rotation and about a study group she'd joined, and about a nursing student named Priya, who seemed to be becoming a friend. She didn't ask about Evelyn directly. She asked about the program, which was a way of asking about Evelyn without creating an opening for him to deflect, which was also consistent with Maisie's operating philosophy. "It's working," he said, about the program. "I know," she said. "I Googled it. There's not much to Google yet." "There's enough." She turned her water glass slowly on the table, a habit she'd had since she was small. "She's good at this. At building things. She is," he said. "You're good at the part she doesn't know how to do," Maisie said. "And she's good at the part you don't know how to do." He looked at her. "I'm just observing," she said, with the expression of someone who was doing somewhat more than just observing. "Dad, don't. I'm not doing anything." She picked up her chopsticks. "I'm eating dinner with my father before my first clinical rotation. This is a completely normal dinner." "It is," he agreed. "Let's keep it that way." She looked at him across the table with her mother's eyes and said nothing else, which was louder than saying something. He drove home alone and sat in the apartment for a while in the way he sometimes sat, not thinking about anything specifically, just letting the day settle. He thought about the Commerce Street building and Denise Okafor's face when she described 11 years of noticing things nobody asked about. He thought about Marcus running training sessions with a competence that had nothing to do with the program's funding, and everything to do with who Marcus was. He thought about a plywood and workbench table and a woman with a yellow legal pad and handwriting that ran up the margins. Thought about the Thanksgiving kitchen and the coffee cups and the dog barking 2 houses down. Thought about the fact that he was, for the first time in a long time, building something again. Plan, not a repair. Something with a longer horizon. Something that would still be there after he was done with the immediate piece of it. He wasn't sure when that had started feeling possible. Thought he thought it might have been around the time he started disagreeing with Evelyn in conference rooms and arriving at things they couldn't have reached separately, which was the specific pleasure of collaboration that he'd forgotten was available to him. The anniversary ceremony was Evelyn's idea, but it didn't start as a ceremony. It started in June, when the bank's new management, Riverton Trust, had been acquired by a regional banking group in the months after the robbery, which had accelerated certain renovation plans reached out to Evelyn about the redesigned lobby. They were reopening in October, exactly 1 year after the robbery, and they wanted to acknowledge the community response. They asked if she wanted to be part of it. She called Graham. "They want a ceremony," she said. "I know," he said. "Jocelyn forwarded me their letter." "Jocelyn forwards everything to everyone," Evelyn said with the tone of someone who had made peace with this. "What do you think?" "I think it depends on what the ceremony is for," he said. "If it's for the bank, I'm not interested. If it's for the security guard and the employees who stayed calm and the officers who ran the entry, then maybe." She was quiet for a moment. "And the program?" "The program can speak for itself." "Graham, it's been operational for 8 months. We have documented outcomes. We have 3 buildings that are measurably safer. We have a waiting list and a curriculum, and Marcus has trained 11 people who are now running their own walkthroughs in their own buildings." She paused. "At some point, the program needs to exist publicly if it's going to grow the way it should grow. It can exist publicly without a ceremony. The ceremony gives it a moment," she said. "Before and after. The bank lobby is the before. What we've built is the after." Another pause. "And the scholarship recipients," she said. "There are 9 of them now. Nursing students, emergency services students, technical trade students, who, because of something that started in that lobby. Don't they deserve a moment?" He didn't answer immediately. "Cameras on me," he said finally. "I can't promise 0. "I'll manage it," she said. "You'll be there as the program's operational director, as the person who was in the lobby. Those are 2 different things, and I know how to keep them that way." He said he'd think about it. He thought about it for 4 days and then told her yes, because the scholarship students were real, and Denise Okafor's 47 building vulnerabilities were real, and Marcus's 11 newly trained building safety advocates were real. And all of those real things deserved a moment that was bigger than a press release. The ceremony was on a Thursday morning in October, 1 year and 2 days after the robbery. The bank's lobby had been redesigned with the specific input of the ground-level initiative, Schweizer Serps corridors, improved emergency exit visibility, better lighting in the transitional spaces between public and private areas, an employee safety room that Denise Okafor had helped design based on the Commerce Street model. The marble was the same. The brass fixtures were the same. The building now moved differently. The way spaces move differently when they've been thought through by the people who work in them rather than only by the people who own them. Graham arrived at 8:45. The lobby was filling slowly. The security guard, whose name was Carl Briggs and who had recovered from the injury to his knee that he'd sustained during the robbery and had since returned to a desk position at a different branch, arrived with his wife. Graham crossed the lobby and shook his hand first, which was the right order of things, and Carl seemed to understand that. Howard Pryor was there in a new suit that looked like he'd bought it for the occasion and was not yet comfortable in it. He saw Graham from across the room and came over and said, "Mr. Vance," and Graham said Howard, and they stood together for a moment in the lobby that Howard had knelt in a year ago saying, "I have allergies," to a man with a gun, and the memory of it was in both of their faces in a way that didn't need to be spoken. "You kept everyone calm," Graham said, "when it mattered." Howard looked slightly surprised. "I didn't do much." "You did the right things," Graham said. "That's not nothing." Marcus arrived at 9, with 4 of the building safety advocates he'd trained, who were attending as representatives of the program. He found Graham near the service corridor entrance, which was now clearly marked and well lit, where it had previously been a propped open door in a dim wall. "Good?" Marcus said. "I'm good." Marcus looked at him with the eyes of a man who had been reading Graham Vance for 20 years. "You look like you're calculating exits. Old habit. Try looking at the room like a person for 10 minutes. Graham looked at the room like a person. He saw Carl Briggs talking to his wife near the window. He saw Howard Pryor accepting coffee from a young bank employee. He saw 9 scholarship students in a cluster near the center of the lobby. Some of them in nursing scrubs, and some in the practical work clothes of people beginning technical training. All of them at the particular life stage where they were still surprised to be in a room where someone had decided to bet on them. He saw Evelyn standing with one of the bank's new senior managers, listening with the focused patience she deployed when she was gathering information, and not yet at the point in the conversation where she'd made a decision. She was wearing a dark suit, and her hair was the way she wore it for professional things, and she was doing the thing she did where she looked like someone in charge of the room while being fully present in the conversation in front of her. She caught his eye across the lobby. She held it for a moment. He nodded once. She gave him a small nod back and returned to her conversation. Maisie arrived at 9:15 with a name badge from Vanderbilt that she'd forgotten to take off, still in her scrubs because she'd come directly from an early clinical shift, her hair in the practical knot she wore for work. She found her father near the corridor entrance and stood beside him and looked at the lobby with fresh eyes. "Different," she said. "The exit signs are better," he said. "That's not what I meant." She looked at the scholarship students. "Which ones are the nursing students?" "3 of them, I think. Program coordinator can tell you." Maisie looked at him. "Can I go talk to them?" "Why are you asking me?" "I don't know," she said. "I'm asking." "Go," he said. She went. He watched her cross the lobby and introduce herself to a girl in scrubs who was maybe 2 years younger than her, and watched the girl's face open up when she realized Maisie was a nursing student too and had just come from a clinical shift. Watched the conversation become reals in the minimal molds. 40 seconds, the way conversations between people who are in the same difficult thing become real. Thought about Lily. She was coming with Evelyn's mother at 10. Evelyn had told him this separately from the official ceremony information, as a piece of information he might want to have, which was the way she communicated things she was uncertain how to categorize. No, they had not resolved what they were to each other. He was not sure resolved was the right word. Some things didn't resolve so much as become clear through accumulation, through enough dinners and working sessions and arguments about program structure, and an afternoon in December when Lily had announced she wanted Graham to come to her. School's winter pageant, and Evelyn had said they'd see, and Lily had said that meant yes and had been correct. And Graham had sat in a second-grade school cafeteria on a Thursday evening, watching a 7-year-old narrate the water cycle in a paper cloud costume, and Evelyn had sat beside him, and neither of them had said anything about the fact that they were sitting there together, because the fact didn't need to be announced to be real. He was 38 years old. And he had been alone in the way that people are alone when they've learned to fill the space themselves. And Evelyn was 31, and she had been alone in the way that people are alone when they've learned to make the space so full of work that the absence becomes invisible. Neither of those kinds of alone were particularly dramatic, were just the shapes that their lives had taken, and the shapes were changing, and neither of them was forcing it or pretending it wasn't happening. Was enough. For now it was enough. Patricia arrived with Lily at 9:55. Lily was wearing a red coat. This time the yellow raincoat had been retired in November, having developed a tear in the left pocket that Lily had declared made it unwearable. Graham had privately offered to sew it, and she'd looked at him with the expression of a 7-year-old who appreciates the gesture, but had already moved on. And she came into the lobby and looked around with the candid assessment she applied to all spaces, and then she found Graham and crossed to him at the same speed deployed when she'd located what she was looking for. She stopped in front of him. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. She looked around the lobby. "It's better." "Yeah." "The lights are better. And that door," she pointed at the service corridor entrance, "is not propped open anymore." He looked at her. "How do you remember that?" She gave him the look that said the question was obvious. "I was there," she said. He crouched down, eye level, the way he always did. "How are good?" she said. "I got 100 on my math test. That's excellent. Miss Patterson said I was the only one." She paused. "I told Maisie, and she said math was her worst subject." "It was always mine too," he said. Lily looked at him with sudden interest. "What was your best subject?" "Spatial reasoning," he said. "Figuring out how things fit together." She thought about this. "Like puzzles? Like buildings?" he said. She nodded, processing this, filing it in whatever internal system a 7-year-old uses to build a complete picture of a person they've decided matters to them. Then she reached into the pocket of her red coat and produced a folded piece of paper and held it out to him. He took it and unfolded it. It was a drawing, crayon on notebook paper. It showed a stick figure in a gray jacket and a small stick figure with dark hair and a yellow coat. They were inside a building. She'd drawn the marble pattern on the floor. With impressive specificity, gray and white squares, and the larger stick figure had its arm around the smaller one. Underneath, in the careful, large print of a child who was still negotiating the relationship between letters and the space they were meant to occupy, she'd written, "The man who caught me." He looked at it for a moment. He didn't say anything. It wasn't anything to say that would have been an improvement on the paper in his hands. He refolded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, where it sat against his chest for the rest of the morning. The ceremony itself was 35 minutes. Evelyn spoke without notes, which he'd expected. And she spoke about what she'd learned in the past year, which he hadn't expected her to be as specific about as she was. She talked about the lobby. She talked about what she'd seen and what she'd missed. She described, without naming him, a man who had spent 40 minutes in a room and understood it better than she had after 12 years of owning buildings, because he'd been paying attention in a way that she'd spent her career teaching herself not to see. She didn't make it sentimental. That was the thing that made it land. She made it factual. The way she made most things factual, and the facts were more affecting than any sentiment would have been. She announced the permanent funding of the ground level initiative. She announced the scholarship expansion from 9 recipients to 30 in the coming academic year, across nursing, emergency services, and technical trades. She named Carl Briggs. She named Howard Pryor. She named Denise Okafor, who was standing near the service corridor entrance, looking like a woman who had not expected to be named in a room full of people and was deciding how to hold it. She did not name Graham. He had asked her not to. She had kept the agreement. When she finished speaking, and the room gave her the kind of applause that meant people had been genuinely moved rather than merely impressed, she walked directly to where he was standing near the back wall, which meant the room saw where she went after the speech, and the room could draw its own conclusions. She stopped beside him. "How was that?" she said quietly. "Accurate," he said. She exhaled slightly, which was as close as she came to showing relief. "Denise is going to kill me for using her name. Denise is going to love it for the rest of her life and make you feel guilty about every moment she spent invisible," he said. "Probably both," she agreed. Around them, the lobby was doing what lobbies do when a formal moment ends and ordinary human interaction resumes, people moving towards each other. Conversation starting, scholarship students being introduced to Marcus's building safety advocates, Carl Briggs talking to Howard Pryor, in a corner with the particular ease of 2 people who had been in a frightening situation together and come out the other side. Patricia had found a chair near the window and was watching the room with the assessment of someone who had managed large groups of people for 30 years and still did it instinctively. Maisie was still talking to the nursing student in scrubs and had been joined by 2 others. And Lily was standing in the center of the lobby, looking at the floor. Both watched her. She was standing exactly in the spot where she'd been grabbed 1 year ago. She wasn't distressed. Her posture was the upright, considering posture of a child doing something deliberate. Yes, she was just standing in the spot, looking at the floor around her feet, and then she looked up and found Graham across the lobby. She held both arms out, slightly, the way children do when they want to indicate a space. This here, all of this. He nodded. She nodded back. Then she walked over to where he and her mother were standing, and she inserted herself between them with the physical confidence of a person who had decided this was her place and who was not asking permission. Evelyn looked at her daughter. Graham looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him with an expression that was not performing anything, that was not managing anything, that was just honest in the particular way that people are honest when they've stopped having the energy to be otherwise. Lily said, looking up at both of them, "Pancakes?" Graham looked at Evelyn. Evelyn said, "The diner is 4 blocks," Lily said. I looked it up. They have the blueberry buttermilk ones. She looked at Graham. "You said you'd think about it. It's been months." "It has been months," he agreed. So she looked between them. "Is everyone coming?" Graham looked at Maisie, who had drifted over from the nursing students and was standing nearby with the expression of someone who had been listening for the past 30 seconds and found the situation perfectly satisfactory. He looked at Patricia near the window, who caught his eye and gave him the small nod of a woman who had assessed something in November and had not changed her assessment since. He looked at Marcus, who gave him a look that said, "Don't make me tell you twice," and then turned back to his conversation, because Marcus had always had excellent instincts about when his presence was required. "No." Then he looked at Evelyn. She was watching him with the careful attention of a person who had gotten very good at reading rooms, and was reading this one and knew what the room was saying, and was deciding whether to say it herself or wait for him. He decided not to make her wait. "Yeah," he said. "Everyone's coming." Lily made a sound of satisfaction and took his hand with one of hers and her mother's hand with the other, and began to walk toward the lobby doors, pulling both of them in the direction of a diner 4 blocks away, navigating between the ceremony guests with the total confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going and assumed everyone else would follow. They followed, out through the lobby's redesigned entrance, down the 2 broad front steps, on the Nashville sidewalk, on a Thursday morning in October. Sky was the particular blue that October produces on its better days. Nothing complicated about it, just clear and cold and real. Maisie fell into step beside Graham. Patricia walked with Evelyn. Marcus and Howard Pryor ended up together somehow. Graham suspected would produce something useful because Marcus had the instinct for useful conversations, and Howard was a man who'd been waiting a year for someone to treat him like a resource rather than a footnote. Carl Briggs and his wife were coming too, it turned out. And 2 of the scholarship students, and Denise Okafor, had looked at the invitation in the lobby with the expression of a woman deciding whether she belonged, and had clearly decided she did, which was, Graham thought, whole point. Lily walked between him and her mother, holding both their hands, and she did not slow down or look back at the bank, because she was 7 and 7, moved forward, and the pancakes were 4 blocks away, and that was where they were going. Yes, Graham looked at the sidewalk ahead of them. He thought about all the ways this morning could have gone differently, 1 year ago. Specific arithmetic of small decisions, a propped door, a cart with a turned-out wheel, a number dispenser that never called 47. He thought about the distance between what he'd been when he walked into that bank and what he was now, which was not a distance measured in accomplishment or recognition, but in something quieter and harder to name, in being known by people who knew him on purpose, not by accident, in building something with a longer horizon than the next service call, in a 7-year-old who drew him in crayon and kept his hand on sidewalks and had given him, without meaning to, one of the simplest and truest things anyone had given him in a long time, the experience of being caught by someone else, for once, instead of always being the one doing the catching. The diner came into view on the next block. Through the window, they could already see the booths along the wall, the yellow light inside, somewhat The Saturday morning on a Thursday ease of a place that had been feeding people for a long time and would keep doing it. Pulled them forward. Evelyn looked at Graham over the top of her daughter's head. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything. They'd gotten good at that, at the things that didn't need to be said, because the saying of them would have made them smaller, and some things were the right size only when you left them alone. The door of the diner opened as someone came out, and the smell of coffee and butter and warm batter came through it in a wave that was ordinary and specific, and nothing like enough to explain why it felt, in that moment, like exactly what it was. All four of them walked through the door. The table they got was too small for the number of people who ended up there. They pulled another one alongside it. Someone knocked a menu onto the floor, and someone else picked it up. Lily immediately identified the blueberry buttermilk pancakes on the laminated menu and pointed them out to Graham with the authority of someone confirming intelligence. And he ordered them, and she looked satisfied in the way that she only looked satisfied when something she had decided was going to happen had happened. Coffee came. The food came. People talked across the table and around it, and the conversation was not about anything significant. It was about Maisie's clinical rotation and Marcus's drive from Memphis and what Denison was doing differently in her building since the pilot and whether the bank's new marble floor pattern was an improvement over the old one, which Carl Briggs had strong opinions about, that surprised everyone, including himself. It was ordinary in the way that the best things are ordinary, not because nothing in it mattered, but because everything in it was real, and real things have the texture of ordinary life, even when they are the consequence of extraordinary ones. Graham ate his pancakes. They were good. Blueberry. Buttermilk. Milk. Right weight. Too sweet. He thought about saying this to Lily, and then didn't, because she already knew, and the knowing was better than the saying. Across the table, Evelyn was listening to Maisie describe a patient encounter from her morning shift with the full attention she gave to things that interested her. Zits, which was the same attention she gave to program structure and building schematics and yellow legal pads at midnight. Maisie was talking with her hands the way she did when she was animated, and Evelyn was asking follow-up questions that were specific enough to be real questions and not just encouragement. And Maisie was looking at her with the expression of a 19-year-old realizing that the person across the table from her was someone worth knowing on her own terms, not just her father's. Graham watched this. He thought about all the things he'd told himself he didn't need. He'd told himself that story for 8 years with enough consistency that it had started to feel like truth. And the thing about stories you tell yourself long enough is that they become the shape of your life without you deciding to build them that way. You just wake up one day and the walls are there. He was still not entirely sure how the walls had come down. He didn't think it had been a single moment. He thought it had been accumulation, a propped door, a cart, a child's hand, a woman with a legal pad and handwriting that ran up the margins, a Thanksgiving kitchen, blueberry buttermilk pancakes on a Thursday in October. Lily leaned against his arm. She did it the way she did most things without asking, without checking whether it was all right, with the complete assurance of a 7-year-old who had decided something was true and was acting accordingly. He didn't move. She ate her pancakes, leaning against his arm. Yes, he'd intervened, reading the children's menu on the back of the laminated sheet with the same focused interest she applied to everything, and the weight of her was small and warm and real. He sat in the booth in the diner on a Thursday morning in October and understood with the same quietness with which he understood most things that mattered, that the worst morning of his life had led him here. Because it was meant to. Just because that's how it had gone. And going was enough. Going and sitting down and staying. Outside, Nashville moved through its October morning, indifferent and ordinary and fully itself, and inside the diner, a table of people who had not known each other a year ago, talked and ate and knocked things over and passed the syrup and took up more space than their table was designed for, and none of them were whole, exactly. And none of them were finished, and all of them were the specific and unspectacular way that mattered most, home.